This is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter with me and Maui here. We are joined by Hawka, who not only do you still see doing the events, he does still get in there, he still does the events, but also is a return guest, has done one of these in the past. I think you've already done one of these. Did you ever do two? Did you ever do 2 episodes, Hawka? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I know I've done at least one. But
yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And if people don't know, you might also... keyword might. You might have seen Hawka's content on Reddit, but if you did, it was submitted by me, a 23-year veteran in the industry. So you might think that's weird. Why would you, Thorin, essentially in this analogy, this is like if Steve Jobs had to himself go down and make posts on the Apple forums. Why would you need to do it, Thorin? Because they're so whack at Reddit, if you don't know, guys. They've gone back on the old set of rules where they're back to saying that when a content creator makes a 2-hour video for free and posts it, so I don't know, people can see it, that you're being selfish and you're actually advertising your own work there. And so now they've gone back to the system where they've, instead of it making it 1 out of every 10, now they say it's 5 out of every 20 posts are allowed to be self-promotion. So what it means is, the joke is, Hawka himself would have to, as a part-time job, post on Reddit to post his own video. So I end up posting it. So great job there, assholes, as usual. Assholes.
To be fair, I used to do that back in the day, and I think that's actually part of how you you found me. I remember you commented on some random Vertigo video I made that had a few hundred views. Yeah. So if anyone out there wants to get into this, good.
That is a way to go. That is a way to go. The reason why I bring up though by that point is because that's the sad thing, Hawka, is the people who actually suffer when you make rules like that isn't me, by the way. My video get almost the same views whether it's on Reddit or not. It's actually people who are the smaller content creators. It's actually the people that in theory we're all saying in the community we want. If you don't like me and Maui, you should support every person who makes videos like this, for fuck's sake. If you haven't seen Hawkins, his are way less inflammatory and he's still doing analysis, etc. So if that's your cup of tea, maybe Hawkins your shit. Similarly, think of all the people who you want to become the next commentators and analysts, etc. You find them via this route. So anyway, I just put that out there. Just one of those food for thought things in the community. Surely we can change that, for fuck's sake. There's actually no downside to it. This notion of but they'll just be spamming. I've got some bad news for you. Here's a black pill in the content word. There's no one who's a bum who would make enough content to spam it, you moron. No bum who sits down every day and clicks record on the video. That person doesn't exist. Even the lunatic, by the way, who would do that. Let's say one guy did it. Then he would just get 4 instant downvotes because he'd be a nobody and it would never appear on. The system takes care of itself, boys, so we don't need this anyway. My point is, sadly, it's just locking out good content. If you don't know, unless you've seen my posts on Reddit, Hawka does these videos the kind of clip you'd expect. Every 3 to 4 days, he has a video about a big topic, like Cloud9 makes a roster or G2. He'll probably have a video on it, so check out his YouTube, right? Anyway, what is your good point for today, Hawka?
The funny thing is, as well, I remember last time I was on this show, I feel like I found it way easier to come up with good points, and then the bad and the ugly were harder. And then, you stay in esports longer, you get a bit older, and it's the other way around. And I'm struggling to find good points now.
Okay, right.
But listen, we found something, and it was rigoN to Big. And I just think, honestly, Big have been, I don't want to say irrelevant, but they've been nowhere near as relevant as they were previously in CS2. And I think a big part of that is just because their firepower hasn't been that great. And rigoN, if you don't know, came from Bad News Eagles, Guild Eagles, or whatever. And I know that team was seen as a team that were kind of just aiming and just pugging. But I actually think out of the players on that team, rigoN was the one who looked like he had a pretty good understanding of actual overall map awareness and would make some good moves. So I think he'll fit in on Big. And it's also just nice, I think, to have Big in the scene as a team, because even for someone like Crimbo, who was so hyped about a year ago, we don't really hear anyone talk about him anymore. And I think it's just because Big don't make deep runs at anything. They're not at the big events as much, making, performances against top teams. So even just for players like Crimbo, for their future, I need to see him playing top teams and getting the chance to prove he can maybe be on a good team in the future. And then also, I will also tie it into the whole Tabson point, and just Big as an org are kind of cool in that they obviously want to stay German, and it feels like they're one of the orgs where I actually understand their culture and what they are a little bit more than any other org. They are going for the whole family thing, and you see them stick with that. Even after they bench players, they normally try and find a place for them in the organization, or they try and help out. So I think Big as an org are already cool. And I'm bringing up the Tabson part because we know in the past Tabson has had chances. And listen, if I were him, I'd have just gone international, and then come back to big later, I'd have gone to a phase. But okay, I can respect him at least for wanting to bring up his scene. And then you contrast it with K Serato, where I'm like, K Serato, just tell me why you're staying in Furia. It makes no sense. Like, at least if you're telling me it's for Brazil, I can at least try and like give you something.
Yeah.
But even then, K Serato has like other Brazilian orgs he could go to anyway, whereas Big are just German. But yeah, other than that, on the whole Big side, they're just a team that have a really good culture about them. And I understand what they're trying to do. And I think it is, I'm not going to go full Launders because I don't think I can go full racist. Like he can. But, you know, they're a team that it's nice having a German team, I think, just in the scene. So, yeah, I think this should improve them. It should give them the firepower where I hope they can actually compete again.
By the way, on the whole racist thing, Launders thinks he's found the loophole there because obviously with his demographic background, he can somewhat play with that fire in a way we can't, Hawka. But I actually have a prediction for you. Even though luckily, because it's Launders and we all love him, I don't think it'll actually cause a scandal. But if you wait, he will inevitably, eventually, do like a mini, less stupid version of Smooya. As in, the obvious one I'm waiting for actually is like the team we're talking about. Where if you don't know, guys, there was even a scandal like this about a year ago, where when Bad News Eagles, remember, most of those players are from a country a lot of you Americans won't know. It's called Kosovo, which obviously is one which is like has a very sort of, let's say, like interesting history where basically if you are from other certain countries like Serbia, they essentially don't acknowledge that it exists as a country. What they did is there was a tournament in Serbia, I believe, last year, and they just let these players play and they didn't give them a flag. They almost treated them like the Russians when we had the sanctions against them. So my point is this. I think where Launders will get in trouble for doing the whole, like, I love racism angle, is it's going to be when he does one of those and he doesn't know that he's not anymore commenting on like a country. He's inadvertently like acknowledging a country exists that other people don't, or like making an implication about ethnicity that he doesn't know about, and he'll essentially just trip over and back into a mine on that one that I predict he will just, but we'll see on that one. We'll see whether it gets him this year or next year. But all I'm saying is eventually you're going to somehow, there's so many fraught, you know, like ethnic tensions people don't know about that. Like, it's easy to fuck those up, mate. It's easy. It is.
There's a certain country we keep wondering how all these top riflers are coming out of there, and that's just a touchy one to say something like that. So,
exactly.
We'll
so sooner or later he's going, because, you know, he's going to go, this is where racism is good. And then people are going to go clip and live stream fails, you know, like, so I'm just saying. But here's the thing, to be fair, we're not at all associated with that. We're just on the outside watching, going, let's see if it's a bold strategy, Cotton, let's see if it works out for him. That's basically what we're doing. So come on, Maui, obviously this is a setup for you. What do you think of Big?
Yeah, totally. I feel like the reason that we get so frustrated with certain organizations is that, like, smaller ones, for example, say Furia with K Serato and Big with Tabson, isn't necessarily that we're mad at the fact that, you know, Tabson, well, we are kind of mad that K Serato is staying, but it's also just that it's the inability to surround these players with enough talent that supports their ability. If for Tabson, he had an opportunity to go to G2 at some point in his career. He turned that down so that he could play with other German players, wanted to play with the premier German organization. With K Serato, obviously, it just seems like Furia were allergic for such a long time to signing anybody with any sort of buyout whatsoever. And so they were just kept K Serato seemingly in jail. And I don't want Crimbo to be in jail. I don't want Tabson to be in jail. I like the big organization. Like Hawka said, I feel like I have a great idea of what's going on behind the scenes there. I've spoken to some of the people there, and it's just one of the orgs that is trying to retain its nationality, or at least speaking German. That's why they kind of keep flip-flopping between it. They're always testing the waters. Is it going to elevate us? Is it going to make something of Big Clan if we actually go international like they did during the online era, where they had in 2020 8 weeks as #1 in the world? And I think they after that kind of realized, you know, even though we were #1 in the world, they probably assessed that and then said, okay, well, we could keep going international, but then we lose some of our identity. And do we want to retain that core audience that we have, or do we want to just try to be the best team we could possibly be? Because the reality of it is that a team like Big, or an organization like Big, is always going to be outbid. They're always going to have a G2 or a FaZe clan that's breathing down their neck, that's going to try to poach their players eventually if they do get too big. And it's going to be hard for them to ever actually hold on to some of those contracts, some of those players that they've actually seen blossom into top world stars. And so for them to actually do something in the offseason, I find it to be good. I find it to be really I'm fairly optimistic about rigoN. He is a better player than Prosis. Prosis, I'd say this. When it comes to big, the weak links of that team in the previous season were Surson and they were Prosis. Obviously, they swapped some things around. They decided to drop Sin. They dropped Montu. They picked up Surson. They picked up JDC. JDC was a great signing. JDC's actually looked really stellar for them overall. But Surson, yeah, it allowed them to speak German again, but he hasn't played too well. And then you just had this Prosis guy that, even though he was playing tough roles, he was playing some tough positions, he was running in the entries a lot of the time, there were moments where it just looked kind of dumb. He just kind of didn't seem to have that extra knack. It's kind of almost a good comparison between what rigoN will look like versus Prosis is that it's that when we watched Hooksy play for G2, he just would run in and die and it would look stupid. But when Stewie did it, at least he had some idea about how to tether onto his teammates a little bit better. The thing is that not only is the upgrade going to be better because I think rigoN's a smarter player than Prosis, but he's a much better fragger. Individually, he can shoot so much better than Prosis did. And I overall just rate his decision-making much higher. When it came to the Guild Eagles team, I thought Juan Flatro and rigoN were the best two players. Juan Flatro probably had the most pure firepower, but to me, rigoN was a smarter overall player. And that's what I think Big exactly need for an aggressive rifler. They need someone that has some tempered aggression overall. And so for me, I'm a big fan of this move. I'm glad that Big are going for it. I think it's going to move them up a handful of spots in the rankings. And I think that if they kept their same lineup with Prosis and Searson, I would have had their chances at making the major probably at 25%. But I think with rigoN, it actually doubles. I think it's kind of 50-50 for me now.
Yeah, I actually do think this is a very good move. What I like about the move, and this is a key detail, obviously it goes without saying, everyone's question will be this. When people see the Swiss flag, this is where a lot of people are going to get confused in the same way as you're going to think of Maniac. You're going to go, but isn't Maniac? Everyone thinks he's French is the joke. They often forget he even is Swiss. What people won't know is this. The complicated thing about the country Switzerland, much like the country Belgium, is these aren't like big single picture, like they're just this, they're just Spanish, they're just German. The problem is these countries, because of where they're located, are basically made up of like parts of other countries. So in the same way as someone Belgian can either be more of like a Dutch Belgian, where they almost sound like that, or they could be the one that sounds French themselves, and they're more of the French culture. In the same way as you have Maniac, who's more on the French side of being Swiss. If people don't know, Roger Federer could speak French, but he was actually like the sort of German side of Swiss, if people don't know. And in fact, I believe like Swiss German or whatever was the main language he spoke. So people have asked rigoN already, don't get confused by the Swiss flag. He is going to be speaking in German. Supposedly he speaks German, Albanian, and like fucking, I can't remember what the third one was. And English. So essentially this isn't a move, because that's the frustrating thing to me, to tie back to what you were saying before. It's when they do the thing over and over again of, well, Tabson staying because, you know, he's going to put Germany on the map. It's like, well, then don't fucking change to teams that speak English, you idiot. Because the second you speak English, you've now invalidated that, and he may as well be in FaZe Clan or G2. So I'm with it as long as the plan is, yes, we're agreeing we're doing this project to do German shit. So if the premise is we're going to do the German angle, here's why I actually think this is a really shrewd pickup. Because if you think about it, the real reason they keep going away from the German angle is every time they think they have like a fragger who doesn't speak German. So Xantares was the best example ever. Obviously, he was never going to fucking be speaking full-on German, was he? And then also, you've had it with other players since Man2, etc. When they bring these players in, they go, right, we'll give up the German angle. The best part about this move is, look, rigoN isn't on the level of Xantares, but he is a skilled player. I agree with you guys. So if he also speaks German, it's just a good player to try at this point in time. You tried everyone else in the German scene. You've basically mixed and matched everyone with a Ship of Theseus approach, and you've just kept the main core. But the key thing is, I even thought the last lineup looked good, but the obvious weak player, aside from Sirison, there's no dope AWPer right now, was Prosis. And the rigoN signing is a good one, because what might go under the radar is, I agree, if you look at Bad News Eagles, the two best players far and away were Juan Flatro and rigoN. They were the clear players where your eye test would tell you they had skills, they could frag, they could even frag, but they were some of the best players. They actually had pretty nice aim. And then the other player, and that's why I'm not surprised he went with Juan Flatro to fucking into the breach, was the in-game leader, like Synopsy or whatever. If you ever saw, he was one of those in-game leaders who definitely had like an interesting sort of like read on when to do weird moves on the map and stuff, and do like weird flanks and creep through and stuff. So they weren't a team that had nothing. The problem was, obviously, they weren't mega. I think this isn't a bad move. In fact, the key reason why this hypes me is because, unlike past lineups in Big, The joke right now is actually they just need Sirison to get his shit together in CS2. If that happens, this team would immediately be really good because Crimbo actually is the truth in this team. Like, he pretty much has sort of like matured the way you'd hope he would, unlike the Farthans of the world who never quite got there. He is really good. It's the reason why people were pointing out, and I agree. I almost feel like some of those bigger orgs you hear, like the Vitalities and the G2s, like, do you never consider someone like Crimbo? You know, he would just slot right into some of the spots you guys want him to play. Like, you're all sat there like, oh, where's the bloody anchor? This guy could do it, mate. Like, you could do it right now. So to me, Crimbo at the moment is like found money, and he apparently does believe in this like German project. He still kept tabs in. The Alpha thing's a bit of an issue still. Maui's got a point coming up soon, which also might attenuate why this team might be even better. I think on paper, this is actually a slightly upgraded version of the last roster. And my take on the last roster was it was the best big roster ever. Isn't this about the best you could hope for from their country? So I think if you look at it, again, it doesn't need much from Sirison. Like, they're not that far off, actually. This team could be like put it this way, when you think of teams with bigger names like the Furious of the world, this team could be right with this type of squad. Absolutely. Like, obviously the cool thing is Cologne's coming up, isn't it? Perfect event to potentially see this sort of team mix it up, come through the plane, beat like a team slightly higher ranked than we can all watch. We'll all be cooking. Anything else on this topic? You want to go to yours, Maui?
Yeah. I think because it just connects so well.
One. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I had to hold off from saying this in the rigoN point. The whole big talk is that right now the rumor is that the coach for Big will also change soon, that Toby is in talks with Big right now, and I'm just going to say that this is even bigger than rigoN to me. This is the biggest move possible for Big Clan because Toby is synonymous with success when it comes to Big Clan. When he was playing, or when he was the coach of Big Clan, they completely transformed from what they were in 2019 to 2020, and for people that weren't really aware of how good Big was number 1 in the world for 8 weeks in 2020. And people almost like think that, oh, it's just a fluke. They were only there for a little bit. And I know the online era was weird. It did feel like sometimes, was that just one tournament? No, they won DreamHack Open Leipzig, which was on LAN at the beginning of that year. They then, when it switched to the online era, they won some pretty impressive tournaments, in my opinion. They beat G2 in a reverse sweep at the DreamHack Masters event, where they beat them. They were down 0-2, came back to win 3 maps straight. They beat Vitality in the best of 5 grand finals at CS Summit, which was an RMR.
And that was when Zero was cooking, by the way, guys. That wasn't a bad
Yes.
Vitality either, yeah.
It was a really strong Vitality, and they also had a 1-map deficit by default because Vitality came from the upper bracket, so they actually won that 3-1. They were doing well. They won DreamHack Open Summer against a heroic team, which we all know ended up powering up like crazy later on, and even in some of the later tournaments in that season, they were still 3rd at the Blast Premier Fall event. They were still top 4 in an event in December, but then Toby left, and Big fell off a cliff, a massive cliff, and we started to see the stale play come out from Sirison. It did coincide with the fact that Xantares left then. It felt like everything was all based off of the fact that Toby was bringing so much to the table as a coach, and to me, I think everybody at this point knows it's not the glory days of Big aren't pre-2020. They aren't even after that. They are 2020. 2020 was the best year ever for Big, and it was when Toby was the coach. Even Sirson's performance himself, it went from being a top 20 player in the world to being pretty much irrelevant and kind of spamming the same plays that he had throughout all of 2020. And if Toby does rejoin this roster for Big, I will have a seriously renewed faith in them. I'm not sure about where the ceiling is, but I could say that we're going to definitely see a market improvement in Sirison, and I will say that it's going to be better than Gabi. I know that people love Gabi. I like Gabi a lot too. I think Gabi is fantastic. Obviously a German legend, probably the most legendary German player maybe ever in all of Counter-Strike. But Toby, in the peak that I have, I know like Thorin, we've had GOAT discussions before, and it's kind of like longevity or is it peak? If we're taking peak, Toby's the GOAT. He's the GOAT coach of Germany for me. Like I don't see anybody that could really mess with the results that he had in the modern era of CS in which he was coaching.
To be fair, do we know what he's been doing? Like, because he's been gone a few years, right? Has he been on another team at all, or is he just?
As far as I know, he's just fucked off, didn't he?
He's the CEO of Skin Baron, and so he just made a ton of money. Like Skin Baron just it's just a
I
trading.
think
website.
it was
It's a marketplace.
intimated that he was like a bit burned out, because if you don't
Yeah.
know, he was like the ridiculous. Like I once did one of those Flashpoint podcasts with him, and he was like the ridiculous stereotype of like a German. Like, put it this way, he even had that saying, which apparently they have in Germany, where they're so like fucking Protestant, like blue collar work ethic, that they're saying is that thing like, you know, if you're on time, you're late, and if you're like 5 minutes early, you're on. You know, like that shit. Hawka, like he was one of those coaches apparently. Like you had to be like exactly on time. Yeah,
He had that line in a Flashpoint interview, which was that he's like one of those people that just purely believes in the power of volition. Where he was like, his name's Tobias Herberhold, and he was saying in that I remember that interview you did with him and Monty, where he was like, you know, I just told everybody on the team that you can change your destiny in one day. You know, the name Herberhold, we were always late, but I just said one day I'm no longer going to be late, and no, I'm not late anymore. It's just like he's just one of those guys. He could just snap change, and I think that resonates with the team that he was coaching.
Obviously, I avoid all jokes that would involve the power of will, but keep going, yeah.
Yeah, I just like the idea. He didn't even just say it about like himself being.
No,
late.
it's like
my whole generation.
It's like he's
always been
breaking
late.
the generational curse. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's going to change his whole bloodline. Exactly. I love it.
His lineage is
dope.
completely different.
It's actually dope. It's like some Game of Thrones shit, isn't it? I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, fair play. I think honestly, Maui kind of smashed most of the points on this. He also was on that Sprout lineup before, in case people don't know. Which, like, considering the players they had at that time, they did well as well. So yeah, he just seems like a good coach. And then obviously, will have worked with like Tabson before. So it's like you have some at least. I don't know the word, but you know what I mean. Like some
Heritage
going forwards where, yeah, exactly. It's not like he's just coming in randomly. I guess the question is, I don't know how much he's been following CS2. Maybe it takes a bit of time for him to fully get up to speed. But yeah, I think, like Maui said, pretty much a slam dunk. Was there in a lot of their success. I can't say I know like that much about the guy, so I don't think I can add much more on. But yeah, it just seems good all round.
I would just say this. I actually agree with the framing that Maui did, which is it shows how name value is everything in esports. It's not, because the problem is people have a hard enough time literally on their screen watching the player move his gun around and knowing like, is he good or not? I need a number to tell me. Please, I must have a number and a graph to tell me, is he actually shooting them well? So if you can't literally believe your own eyes and interpret it, then you shout a look trying to like infer via lateral thinking what a coach might be adding or not adding, like Maui just attempted to do. So I think the problem you have in the German scene is this. Whenever God B was the coach of Big, every fan didn't even want to hear that he might not be the best coach because it's God B. If you noticed how this like CS royalty concept that I came up with years ago is really useful as an analytical lens. Because what you learn is, dude, it'd be bad enough if they were saying like God B was IGLing and he could still do it. They have no reason literally to ever believe God B the coach is an all-time great coach. They just knew he was an all-time great in-game leader. But somehow they've conflated those ideas so heavily that the best example right now is obviously Taz in G2. They act like if you say Taz in G2 might not be a good enough coach for G2, you're somehow like denying all the things he did as a player in a completely different role, which is such a weird, like, almost like... It's almost like he didn't do it intentionally, but it's almost like an amazing fucking like defense line of like defensive minds before you can ever even get into the real topic of like, what is he doing as a coach? And is he the right coach for this team? So unfortunately, I think the whole God B thing, because God B essentially is Big Clan, if you think of the history of why they became German and why they made this lineup and the fact that he like mentored Tabson and picked a bunch of these players over the years. So the problem you had was God B essentially got to live off his status as a great all-time great in-game leader. And then, by the way, if you ever watch a lot of those interviews I did, even though everyone would give it up to him on like his knowledge of the game and his game planning, almost every player had their own version, but they would make it in the interview because he was the coach. Like a sort of, silly old gob, isn't he weird with his idiosyncrasies? But if you ever listened and read between the lines, they were actually telling you some of his flaws. Like, for example, because I think about this is a great example of where an in-game leader is different from a coach, right? The sort of thing that God B used to do as an in-game leader, where he could just just watch like the game before, break it down, like see through the matrix and then go like, we're going to do this, this and this. People were telling me as a coach that actually was fucking them up. They said like they do all, because if you don't know, Big Clan the whole time, I think part of the Toby legacy is they've always been hard practices, I've heard. They're the people who don't take the weeks off, and the second like the break ends, they are back in the office and they are grinding and they're playing all the online qualifiers. And I've heard they're a really diligent team the whole time. Well, the problem with that is if you drill stuff like day after day after day after day, and then you come to like an official game and your coach basically tells you like, chuck off that playbook out. I've just come up with 3 brand new things now. It's like, bro, you're overwhelming me. 1, what did I practice all that for? And 2, I'm not you. I can't just remember like 3 totally unique bespoke strats that you've come up with instantly from a game, which remember, you just watched, but I didn't even watch. I'm just going off what you're telling me. So I actually got the feeling, unfortunately, he was, to me, that's like an example where you're almost like thinking you're an in-game leader too much, and you're actually like leaning on your crutch. And the flaw you're going to have there is, that would work when God B did it as an IGL, because he's also in the game to call it. Like he's there in that scenario. If you don't know that, then the guy doesn't even have to remember the whole strat. That might even be for one player like Crimble. Like, Crimble, you just hang back there until you see a flash at 240. You know, like you can do that if you're the IGL. If you're the coach, everyone in the game has to remember that and all the moving parts, and then someone has to execute. That's really hard. So I actually got the vibe that if you go and look, by the way, the God B era is not that great for results. It's very up and down. It's like a graph like this. It's all over the place, and that's as, by the way, they're getting good players, bad players, whatever. It doesn't matter what players they brought in, it never ever quite worked. Whereas the difference is the Toby one was way better. And like I implied when I was talking about that Mauisnake angle, I do think actually that this guy, in a good way, is like the stereotype of German discipline, like the systems-based approach of like, this is how I drill you on everything. Because if you remember as well, the other underrated thing about Big back in the day was, not only were they working with Xantares, it was a very different piece, but they managed to make work in their team. They used to also have like a really strong map pool. Like, dude, that team had it going. Like, yes, it was online, but at the end of the day, like we say, like the teams they were beating were the teams that would have won the lands, like Vitality and fucking G2 and FaZe. Like, these were pretty good teams back then. Like, these were banger players. These were like, people weren't bombs in those teams. So no, I think this is a good move. And then the obvious other angle is, as alluded to by Hawka there, the part people are going to forget is this, Hawka, is this guy. Are you ready? I'll go back in time with you. So he was in Big Clan, like Maui said, the year Sirison got really good. Then if you go back a few years, he was in Sprout when Sirison was there and was getting pretty good. Then if you go back before that, he was in Alternate Attacks where there was a guy called Sirison who became an open. So if anyone could be the Sirison Whisperer, this is your guy. Like, this is the guy who's known him the whole time. By the way, another thing, every interview I did with a big player, when I would ask about this guy, if they ever were on one of those teams, they all bigged this guy up. Every person had only good things to say. So I even think that's why I alluded to on the other part before we mentioned the Toby part. If all we've got left in Big is make Tirison like 15% better, this might be the guy who can do it. If anyone could do it, it's going to be this guy. So I love this move. It feels like what you've actually done is all the other big lineups were like, well, this player's a good one. I'm not sure about that one. You've finally made a lineup where in theory almost all the players look legit. And now as we're talking about, you brought back maybe the best big coach ever. I'm in for this, mate. I actually think this could be really cool. I'm actually hoping they just become like the sort of tactical unit with like above average firepower and they get cooking. Like, let's get this team to like 12th in the world and I will be fucking interested. That's when I'll start getting a bit hyped, you know.
Yeah, I really just hope it's completely true because it's kind of just rumblings right now. But I was kind of like, yeah, this one, it with in the tandem of just rigoN coming in and Toby, I actually there's a lot for Big to gain here.
Oh, I've got one. I know what I'm going to pick as my good. It's going to be really off topic, but here we go. My good is actually going to be, you might have seen this, Maui, because I did retweet this, even though it was in Portuguese. Henny, after all these years, I feel like Henny and Art, like, guys, hasn't this experience this year just showed? Just tell us what's going on. If you tell us, by the way, we can change the narrative. If you don't tell us, we are going to stick with an old narrative. So basically, Henny came out and he actually himself indirectly addressed like criticisms that like everyone thinks he just wants to party and he doesn't care about CS. He's not dedicated. So if you go and look it up, because he's just been benched from Imperial, in his statement, he basically said something along the lines of like, I mean, it was in Portuguese, but basically, yeah, like that people think he's just partying that way and that he isn't. Now, the reason why I put this as my good point is, dude, I actually think like that guy now has a tragic career, but for not the original reason. The first half of his career, remember, he played a long time. If people forget, he basically came up the same time the major wing Luminosity did. So we're talking like almost 10 years ago now. Let's say the first 3 or 4 years, he was actually, for my opinion, for my money, one of the most obvious examples of wasted talent. And if you know football, you'll love this Hawker. He was obviously in that sort of Ronaldinho, Neymar class of like, bro, you actually probably could have been the GOAT, but you just didn't care enough. Like, you know, you were happy to just be like really good and then just fuck around and do whatever else, which, you know, there's a certain type of person that might even be considered cool. You know, you're pretty good, but you also party, you do whatever you want, you play with whoever you want. That's, people can understand the romance of that. But the tragedy at the time was, if you ever watched how fast his firing speed was, how like aggressive he could be, you always thought to yourself, like, bro, if this guy locked in, he'd be like one of the best AWPers ever. And he never did at that time. Then he had the Furia time, that 1 year, but sadly we had to go online, where his game got really fucking tight and he sort of shored up all his weaknesses. And then he also, in a team that has never since or before ever been good around the AWPer, they integrated him fully. And that team was the best that team has ever looked, that Furia lineup. But then, when he like left, remember, they even let us, as the art tell-all pointed out, they let us think he left. And so we all did that thing of like, oh, it's the same thing again. He probably left because he wants to play with his brother. Like, bro, stop partying. The Villa mix. Oh, fuck, this is like F and X and him all over. And apparently that's not even true. Apparently they kicked him for whatever silly reasons, something to do with like he was going out too much or something. Even though at the time, by the way, this was COVID when everyone was just stuck inside. It's not like he was going out the night before the major, as supposedly they did at the PGO Krakow major. So the sad thing is, I actually do feel like this is someone where I get his frustration. The frustration is his narrative became so heavy and had such like a sort of insane forward momentum that like no context since then has slowed it down. And essentially, he's sort of being punished in 2024 for a narrative that at this point in time sounds like it's from like not even the 2020s. Like it's quite old at this point. So the good is this. The good is, one, it doesn't look like his career's over. He even says in this statement he'll like prove everyone wrong. And two, if this is actually a Henny that's dialed in, that guy, by the way, I've seen his open when he was in MIBR and when he was joined the Imperial team. He's not bad. He's certainly not bad. He's still like a quality player. If he actually is motivated, like that's an interesting dynamic, because think about all the discussions we had when Fallen joined Furia. It's like, well, what other AWPer can you get? They've already tried Save. This is a whole new dynamic if you consider like they need players like this in the Brazilian scene. So I think that's a good sign. The idea this guy actually cares now, that is good news. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think, oh man, it's just also he was just so fun to watch on Furia. That was always the thing. Like the X Factor style of AWPing, like he would genuinely kind of remind me, I'm not going to say like Monacy, like that's too far, but like he'd have those moments where you're like, he's doing things other AWPers would never even dream of doing. He wasn't like I don't know, like a Wonderful now where you're like, okay, he's good, but he just kind of sits back the whole time. It was actually crazy fun to watch. And that's probably why he actually worked on Furia, because they kind of needed an AWPer like that with how wild they were playing. So yeah, I'm with you that it's exciting. I'm still like slightly skeptical just because I know so often, not that he's like not changed, but so often I feel like there could be a window where you have that talent, and now maybe it's just like you are a bit older now, and
okay,
yeah, we probably should have been aware that like there's some people that don't change and that they'll just party forever. Okay, but realistically, he's going to change at some point. But I'm still a bit like, I wonder if he had that window where he could have been like great. And now it's like, I think he could probably be good, but I don't know if he could be that like elite AWPer that, you know, that potential in the past. It's like, it feels like very, very hard that he would ever actually reach that. But I'm still excited about it. I actually don't know even where he'll go right now. That's the thing. We've got to figure that out, I guess, first, because yeah, he's got like, it feels like he's got a long way to go considering he's not even on Imperial now. It's like, you've got to do a lot to grind your way back up, right?
By the way, here's even the quote. I actually found it now. It says, in these last few years, I have dedicated myself a lot to stay at the top. About outside the game stuff, many people insinuate stuff and are stuck in the past. But I assure you that I am a mature man focused on my career, my relationship, and my family. Now, aside from this part, that second part does sound like something a politician would say. But what I love about the statement there is, notice contained in the statement, he doesn't just go, people insinuate stuff, but it's not true. He goes, in these last few years, and then later he goes, Many people are stuck in the past. He's basically admitted it was all true. Like, and even that last part to me, if you think about the list he just ran through there, he goes, I'm a mature man. It implies before he wasn't mature. I'm focused on my career. Well, he obviously wasn't focused on that before. My relationship, well, we all can imagine what his status might have been before. And his family, I'm imagining before, let's say he was trying a lot of like Norton antivirus 7-day trial runs of families, if you get the analogy I'm going with there, you know. So fair play. I actually, in a fucked up way, Hawk, I know what you mean. A lot, like, for example, spoiler, every team smooya joins, they're all going to do that thing where they all come out and go, he's not at all toxic or a problem like before, he has changed and matured, because they know it's what people want to hear. But in a weird way, the fact that you sort of admit that you obviously weren't that before, but now you've changed, I think that's actually the good sign, believe it or not. I think it'd be worse if you were like, I'm not like that, and plus it wasn't true anyway. That'd be more worrying to me. What do you think anyway?
It's really convincing. That's the best part about it, because he does admit it. Yeah, I was gonna bring that up too. Also,
yeah.
I will say that of all the things that I've read by translating Portuguese to English using the auto translate on Twitter, this is the most compelling by far. I've read a lot of messages of this sort, and nothing's really struck a chord with me. That being said, Henny, I've made this public before.
There was that time I read that thing where they said something about me being a poet that put a pear up my arse or something. Because you know the thing about Portuguese insults is they're like very poetic in a fucked up way, aren't they? There was something about how I'm a poet and I put a pear up my arse or something. What's mad about that is it's so evocative. Like, that's when I get caught in like some labyrinth of language. Like, what does it mean though? It's so, you know, there's something so like powerful about that image, but what is it though?
Exactly. Yeah. It's sometimes I just don't always know what's happening in these messages, but then even like, for example, somehow when I read this one versus the config one, I also think the best thing about this is that Config wrote his apology letter within like 2 weeks of the incident happening, as if he's going to suddenly have a change of heart. The last time that there's been a negative incident with Henny is practically like Gary supposedly wanting him to not party at all in the art disclaimer or the art reveal at the end of it all. And I don't, but that was...
This is 4 years ago, presumably, right? That's quite a while ago now.
Yeah, so long ago. And even when he did that, he was a top 20 player. And so I wasn't, and it was in a pretty competitive time too. So I'm not really holding that too hard against him. Like the stuff that where we really hold, like the stuff that made Henny kind of the bad boy of Brazil opping versus like the fallen, you know, just Godfather figure, was that it was the event with KNG where they were all, you know, hung over the night before the grand finals where they had to forfeit a map.
It was like DreamHack Montreal or something. I think something like that.
Yeah, when they to CLG or whatever, or when they still beat CLG, and FNS tweeted that thing about like
not. They lost to North in the final. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, are you saying didn't FNS say something like we lost the guys that were hungover?
Yeah. What happened is they didn't understand he was doing a backhanded compliment. He was basically saying like, "You guys beat me, but you're also hungover." But then they just took that as like, "How dare you imply we were hung up? We were, but how dare you?" You know. Like, and then famously, KG was like, "Prove it, or I'll kill you," and then attempted to.
He's looking for
kill
him in the hotel.
Okay, so, all right. Weird how that works.
I can't go to the after party, basically. Yeah. So that's the thing. It feels like Henny's more disconnected from that sort of past, whereas... So I can believe this more. That's the thing. I haven't heard any issues with Henny for quite some time. In this year, I felt like Henny was a totally reasonably strong opper for Imperial. It's another reason that I feel like this kind of change of heart will benefit him pretty greatly, because at the RMR event itself, him and Imperial were farming people in the local competition, and that's why I honestly was pretty sure that they weren't going to keep it up. I honestly thought the reason that they were so good is because at the Americas RMR, let me remind everybody, Henny was the highest rated player of that entire event. And there was Mobs playing, there was Twist playing, there were all these top players from the Americas region playing, and Henny just farmed everybody. They only had to play a couple games, but he demolished Payne, who did quite well. I mean, everybody was pretty surprised by how good Payne was at the major, but I mean, Henny absolutely destroyed them. He dropped in the second map, he went 21-6. Like, he's still a very strong player overall, and in terms of his game style, his gameplay, The only thing that was really that maybe even holds him back sometimes is that he usually surrounds himself with aggressive riflers, and so he doesn't have as many opportunities to go for aggressive picks. Like, think of the people that have been with him throughout his career. He's been playing with Phelps lately. He was playing with Furr before. He's playing with who else was he playing with? Art, yeah, obviously, yeah. I think he's played with a lot of people in different times that have just been like super aggressive, and so he's just kind of learned that style of just wait in the back lines a little bit. You'll clutch. He's a very clutch player. If anything, if people just really aren't familiar with Henny's game, one guy I guess I could consider him similarly to. This sounds kind of preposterous because obviously this guy's on another level, but it's kind of like he's like Shiro. He's more passive. He saves a little bit more than you probably would want from a guy like that, but he has incredible skill. Not necessarily as good of a rifler as Shiro is, but that's kind of my like one-to-one comparison if people are just completely unfamiliar with him.
Shall we go to the bad? Hawka?
Yeah, sure.
Time for the bad?
Let's do it.
Yeah, okay. I think we are gonna like hijack the show here and accidentally turn it into a hot take point made for a little bit because we're going back to the G2 moves. Okay, we're going back to the G2 moves. I know you think this topic has been beaten to death, but I don't know if I'm a full Snax defender, but I don't.
Oh, by the
think
way,
this move
I
is
saw
that
the
bad.
tweet. If you don't know,
Mate,
he actually
yeah.
tweeted something like that, like it's actually a good move to bring Snax in. So I'm very interested where we're going on this one, Hawka.
No, okay. First of all, I do think the Morbs move is worse because reportedly, I think there was a report that they spent like 500k on him.
It was something expensive, yeah, sure.
Which is just crazy because just opportunity cost tells you that money needs to go on an anchor, an in-game leader, something else, instead of bringing this inexperienced guy who I know he's been good recently, but he's not even like
he doesn't have much
that
experience.
much time.
It's true.
Yeah, exactly. And I have seen him be inconsistent in the past. So listen, I don't want to bag on Morbs too much because I think that move, everyone hates that move where you bring him in and you probably change his roles and it probably goes badly. But I also think the Snax thing is overblown.
Come on.
And here's why. Okay, firstly, in the past, I was a bit of a Hooksy defender, saying I don't think there's anyone you can get.
At least he's
better.
doing this disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So, I feel like you're already going to discount me.
You probably prefer Sprite over Coke as well, don't you? Come on, keep going.
Dr. Pepper, actually.
There you go. That's more on brand. Okay.
Like a unique
Dr. Pepper is very much the Hooksy of drinks. It's true. Okay.
Okay, first thing I think that changed it all is I do think after Dallas, I think that's when Hooksy was just dead in the water. I'm not going to lie. I think the team just lost faith fully. At that point, they're just looking around and saying to themselves, okay, we don't understand what this guy is doing. And then at that point, if you are going to bring in an in-game leader, I don't think Snax is this terrible in-game leader that everyone seems to claim he is. Because I think for this move to be bad, you have to think he's a terrible in-game leader. Because he's obviously a better fragger than Hooksy, okay? We could all say that. And he will do a decent job in some of those roles. I think he'll be fine. Even though he's having to adapt his roles, I think he'll be fine in changing his roles. And when I look at Gamer Legion, okay, I don't think this team had some crazy amount of talent on it. I think this team was doing about as well as they should have been with the players they had. And they had a bunch of inexperienced players, which is why I think Snax's default style looks especially bad, because I don't think that Gamer Legion team had really anyone who was going to say, okay, I want to do this. I want to do that. Let's go for this. Let's go for that. Whereas G2 is the opposite team. I think if anything, they have too many of those players, which is why I don't want a micromanagey IGL, which is why I think Alexi kind of failed on this team because it was he wanted it to be way more structured than it ended up being. So I think in that loose system, I think it can actually work. The other thing I will say on Gamer Legion, I know their T-side stats have been very, very bad, but their map pool was basically a bunch of overpass they were playing, which is already going to just be hard on T-side.
Yeah.
And they didn't play Anubis, which is a T-sided map, which I think makes those stats look extra bad. So I'm not saying Snax is some great in-game leader, okay? I'm not going that far, but I just think it's a bit overblown to say he's completely terrible. And I think, okay, the thing I really wanted is if you bring in Snax and you bring in a good anchor player, suddenly I actually think this team would be such a monster CT side team that I actually think their T side wouldn't even have to be that good anyway. But then you bring in Morbs, so I can't really commit to that 100% because I think he is going to get screwed. But that's my case for I don't think this is anywhere near as bad as everyone's making out.
Let me do a follow-up.
And the other thing...
Oh, go make your other point.
Just quickly, I I really didn't want Nico to IGL yet. Like, I
Right.
really didn't want that. And if this goes wrong, like next season or whatever, just switch Snax out and try and get a way better in-game leader. That's the other take.
I need to ask the follow-up Kassad question, though, and it goes like this. Are you saying, based on the bullshit at the end where you used the Malbs thing to, like, temper the take, are you saying if this move had been Nexus stays, but it's a 1-for-1 Snax for Huxley, it would be better with that lineup than when they had Huxley?
Oh, I think similar. I think similar, but potential to be better. I think.
Okay.
But,
I think we know where you're at.
yeah.
Okay. Thoughts, Maui?
Okay, so yes, there's a lot to break down here. Their T side was the worst of everybody in tier 1, okay? They were the worst in everybody that's a tier like top 30 above. They have the worst T side. You are right that they played a lot of overpass, so that can give them a little bit of a break. But even then, if you take away overpass, their T side is worse. Their T side is like it's still the worst if you take away overpass from 2024 for pretty much every team. I think they maybe then beat out like a Game in Gladiators or an Ecstatic at that point.
But to be fair, that's because their T side and overpass was actually pretty good, by the way.
Yeah, their T side on overpass was like that was like a weird highlight for them. But then it's like, okay, so can he only call on one map? So he could only call on he could only call on overpass, and it's not in the pool anymore. So the one saving grace for this whole argument is that yeah, they play a lot of overpass, which isn't in the pool. It's like they nerfed my boy Norbert by taking out overpass of the pool. I'm not really making any excuses for him anymore because he doesn't really have that specialty status anymore. And that's what Snax was. He was a specialty on overpass. They were very good at it. They had a 78% win rate throughout 2024. Every other map was 60% or beneath, and they're not playing good opposition. They're not winning a lot of. Like, okay, here's, for example, Nuke. Okay, Nuke. 2024 Nuke, 38% round win percentage on T side. That's terrible. That's the worst of any team. That's the worst of any team. And they're playing teams like Gun 5, Mao's NXT, Forza, Mao's NXT, Nine Pandas, like they're playing horrible teams, and they don't even have a 40% win rate on that map T side. He's not a great. The stats there is a delta that probably like should be adjusted based off of expected win rate for the maps that they're playing, but the maps that they even should be doing better on T side, they're not doing better on. And so I can't, and the thing is that he doesn't necessarily have like great pieces, but the delta between even their CT side and T side is also the second. It's tied for the largest of any top 30 team this season. The only other team that had a similar disparity between CT and T side was Liquid, and they were both the win rate on CT side for Gamer Legion 52.3%. Like if you have that kind of win rate on CT side, you should be able to put something together on their T side. But they had the worst in all of top 30 teams. So there's a huge like difference between what they're getting out of Snax's supposed calling on that T side and what their players are able to provide on a sometimes debatably more individually focused CT side. So I don't know. I'll just go outright. He was a bad in-game leader. He was a very bad in-game leader. He was good and competent at overpass. And the thing is that even if you want to go a step further here, one of the reasons they were good at overpass is because Gamer Legion was good on overpass with Shuhei also. And so one of the reasons that they were that good is because they had the coach behind them. They had Ash behind him. Ash's whole breakdown on YouTube that he makes to try to sell himself as a good coach is here's my game plan for overpass. This is how we played it, which was to the game plan that I helped create. So if anything, Snax had some gold, which was left behind by Shuhei, that Ash still had in a bottle that he was able to give him. And then Snax on every other map, when left to his own devices, had the worst T side in all of Tier 1 Counter-Strike. So I do think he's a very bad in-game leader. I think the role overlap is still very bad. I still stand by the decision that this is very bad. And I think that, this kind of goes back to the whole idea of like, if we transpose the logic of that we use every time we watch a game of Counter-Strike, that you're supposed to make the highest percentage play possible. You're trying to make a play, and sometimes you go results-oriented, where it's like, well, I guess he hit the shot. That's crazy. That's cool. If it's like the thing is that G2 can still the fucked up thing about this whole situation is that G2 can honestly still win a tournament because they have m0NESY and Nico, and now they even have Mobs for more firepower, and Hunter, who kind of has varying levels of form. And if Snax wins a tournament like that, it's going to look stupid. But in terms of results oriented thinking, or like in terms of just trying to use some sort of probability based logic behind this move, it's catastrophically bad. It's just flat out look at all the numbers breakdown. down all the positions. Everything we've ever thought about roster building is completely out the window with this move. And really, the only things that are kind of holding this move together in terms of ideas is that he's a slightly better fragger than Hooksy, but he's playing much better positions than Hooksy, and that he's also Taz's friend, so he's going to have some chemistry built in right there. But that's chemistry from 9 years ago. So I don't really even hold that. I don't really care about chemistry you had with somebody 8 years ago that badly.
My problem with this one is, like, first of all, fair play to Hawka. I will say, I actually noticed, even though when I designed the concept for Hot Take Point Made, the reason it was never going to be a show with guests is it's almost a poison chalice to ask someone to be on the show, isn't it? Like, unless people get the premise and spoil it, they never will. Like, they'll always take Maui's hot take from that show and act like he just, like, called a press conference and said, like, Big is the 5th best team of all time. Like, they always act like that, even though it's a fucking show where you intentionally do hot takes. But the joke is, like, once people can get their head around the concept, people know it's just fun, that you sort of intentionally, you're incentivized to make it as crazy a hot take as possible. The joke is, it's actually a show where behind the scenes, some people have sort of been like, can I come on that show? Because like, they just want to do a cameo, a one-off episode, they can get their fucking crazy. And also, I'm pretty sure everyone who just gets this persona just wants Kassad to tell you you're insane and that you take makes no sense, right? That almost goes hand in hand with it, doesn't it, at this point in time? So there's that, you know. So the problem I have is somehow you have actually done what would be a hot take on that show, because what you've basically done is you've actually managed the craziest contrarian position I've ever seen, which is we just won. We just broke everyone, Hawka. Somehow, shitty little Stewie 2K coming back with his bad attitude and big ego and being carried to a championship broke everyone in the whole world. And they not only were like, yeah, actually, maybe we don't need Hooksy, even when they'd been arguing with him for like 10 months. And then on top of that, half of the people were like, and actually, yeah, maybe Nico should gel. And you were like, fucking hell, it's like we just gave the whole scene like LSD or something. They've changed. They've had like 10 years of psychotherapy in one night and changed as a person. So somehow, out of all that, Hawka has actually managed to craft the contrarian take, like, actually, this is a good move, though. Because the one take we all had was, in a way, like, we all met in the middle, didn't we? They all agreed Hooksy should go, and they did need to make this change and remove Nexus. But then everyone was like, but at the same time, though, obviously Snax isn't as good as Hooksy. And then you were like, I agree Hooksy should be removed, but also that Snax is better. So you're the only person in the world who believes that. There's you, Snax, and maybe, and I'm saying maybe Taz. When I say maybe Taz, let me have my truth serum and a lie detector. I think I could break him. That's all I'm saying.
I thought you were going to say maybe Snax's mum.
I mean, listen, I have no idea. Listen, I know better which areas not to tread in to cause trouble. So I have no comments whatsoever about Snax's Mohawk. That can stay in your domain entirely. I'll just stay over here on my side of the fence where it's nice and safe. No, here's my problem with this move, though, is I actually think Hawka's done the thing where he's just looked at all the upside, which is accurate, by the way. He did label out there real things based on Game Legion, how they played, what they did. The problem is, though, I think you're being too generous, and here's why. I think both parts of his game will be worse in G2. So this idea that, like, well, he's a good fragger, though. He's a fragger, though, isn't he? Like, the stupidest thing about the Hooksy anglers, the reason I went so hard on G2 for kicking JKS and Hunter being shit compared to CSGO is because I never needed even one frag extra from Hooksy when he had that CSGO team. That team had, you could argue, too much fragging. They had all the fragging you could ever need. I've read those numbers out on past episodes, Maui. If you read out the numbers when they won those like Katowice's, their actual team was doing like 1.20 fragging for the whole team on aggregate. Like, these are numbers that you can't even dream of. If you don't know, guys, there are tons of teams of won CS lands with like the whole team having like a 1.07 rating, and it's just your star popped off, and then the IGL and the support, they shit the bed, and you average it out, and it comes to like not that high. So they were already insane for fragging. So I never needed that part. So already, when people are like, but he's bringing fragging, why do I need more fragging, boys? If I've just signed Malps and I've kicked the two low fraggers, why do I need more fragging? Well, we all know Hunter doesn't play that well at the moment. Nico isn't the top 5 rifler he used to be. So there are questions asked. So one, I don't think actually he's going to be as good a fragger. Like, I'm going to say this right now. My opinion on Snax is this. This is a take you'll appreciate, Maui. He's doing what no modern NBA player ever does. When you get old now as a former NBA star, you don't like let your numbers go down 4 points per game every season, but stay as like a star on a bad team. You just go and ring chase, but you ring chase by being a bench player. You go, fuck my career. You know what? I'm going to give up whatever, like, you know, numbers I could get over my whole career. I'm going to try and win a ring or two. Basically, I'm just going to, can I contribute in any way? The problem I have is, I think in Gamer Legion, he was the guy who used to be an NBA All-Star 10 years ago, and he's on, like, you know, the Sacramento Kings or some not top team, and they're letting letting him still get all the fucking shots he wants, and he's not a 20 point per game, but you know what, he's still getting 16 points per game, and his splits are all right, Maui, and you know what, he can get the odd rebound. The problem is, you couldn't take that player, you'll see where I'm going with this analogy, and then say, put him in one of the best teams, like put him on the Mavs now, and he'll just do all that, and it's like, no, he would do less. He's actually doing that because he has a shit team and he gets to call stuff around himself. So I think the fragging will be worse. And then the idea that the IGL will be better. I think you actually, even yourself, said the reason I don't think it will be Hawka, which is I actually think the mistake of this team was the other reason I think the JKS lineup was genius is because somehow they got a bunch of players who could all frag, but there wasn't overlap. That was what was so crazy. MonteCristo didn't overlap with JKS, didn't overlap with Hunter, didn't overlap with Nico. It was and then Huxley obviously was just a pure sacrificial element. All he would do is just run in like an even shitter version of Carrigan, basically. He just completely sacrificed himself because everyone else could frag. In this team, I actually think they have got massive problems. Like I think one of their biggest problems is Hunter isn't very good, but clearly still has a big voice in the team. That's a nightmare right there. And if you notice, he's never on the chopping block to ever get kicked no matter what. He is beyond Nico levels, mate. They were willing to let Nico go. This guy is just going to be in this team forever, apparently. Then two, you've got the factor that, like, yeah, I'll give it to MonteCristo. He can do whatever he wants. Like, Nico himself, I thought sometimes in the Huxley lineup, sometimes every now and then looked a little bit out of sorts in CS2 as well. Like, maybe he didn't have the quite flavour of when should he be aggressive, when should he listen to this So my problem is I think this team's full of too many cooks. Like, if I look at this team, I feel like between Nico, Snax, and Hunter, you have some enormous fucking opinions here. Then you got MonteCristo, the best player, but then the last player's Malbs, who's stuck in roles he hasn't even done before. Like, again, I'm taking a very cynical route of application here. I think basically all these factors will fail. I think they'll just be in a tough spot. And the saddest one for me is the Malbs one. Like, the Snax one is neither here nor there. I mean, he has to take the job, but I think it's a bad move. So here's the thing. Here's the thing, Hawka. If in like 3 or 4 months this team is actually good and they do win, I'll do a tweet about it. I'll reference this episode and I'll say you got it on record. You got in there first, because I have to say, as far as I know, no other person who's like a big name has actually come on board with this move. I think almost everyone's been negative. Dude, even Yanko, who desperately wants to defend any team Nico's in, had to do that thing of sort of like, well, who else could they get though? You know, like. Bro, and by the way, Duncan was a massive Snax fan, so that's sort of telling you right there, even he knows it's not great. Because, by the way, if you think it's just a great move, you don't do that. You go, no, this is a very shrewd move. You know, no one else would have seen this move. It's a genius move from Pekka. Even he didn't do that, mate. So when the defense lawyer is like that, you know, it's like my joke of when you hear maniacs start going in on Spinks, well, then you know who had a bad game, don't you? You know at that point you had a bad game, so. You know,
yeah,
the defense.
It is one of those where I look around me and I'm like, you know,
you
am I the one insane person or is everyone else insane? I'm probably the one.
You could be the visionary.
Person.
You could be the
Let's
visionary.
be real, but you never know sometimes. And also, I am just going to say what I, genuinely think. So I'm not going to lie.
No, fair play.
I do very much think like a couple things. I do think, he deserves at least some credit for how good Gamer Legion's CT side was. Okay, we do need to give that. And also, like you said, the too many cooks thing. Weirdly, I think Snax is like such not he's like basically the least amount of cooking you can get from an IGL, because I think on Gamer Legion he was basically just saying let's all default and do what we want, which is kind of why I think this could weirdly work, because I think he's literally just going to say default every round, which Gamer Legion did a lot, but on Gamer Legion those players don't know how to do that, so they would just go and die, I feel like, and they would just not really come up with anything, whereas I actually feel like weirdly Snax is going to have that ability, and then I trust that some of the other players will also have those mid-round calls. So as long as they don't completely screw up the starts of rounds, I actually weirdly think it can work. Again, I know I'm sounding crazy right now. Be
really careful. Don't laugh unless you want to get in trouble as well. But I, for real, thought he meant Maui. That obviously he just orders takeaways. And that's why he's... Oh, mate, because he was the one who said, like, with Snax, you get the least amount of cooking ever. It's like, yeah, no shit. Yeah. Just saying, bro. I mean, you're not wrong, but, when you're right, Hawka. That's all I'm going to say. Right, come on then, Maui. What's your bad point? Come on, let's move it on. Let's keep going.
Yeah, mine is just the amount of LARPing we have in Tier 1 Counter-Strike. Just all these players that just think they can take up this role and then just, shed it like nothing. I mean, we've got, lately, it's been Device, who's actually admittedly looked okay as an in-game leader. But then now, it's just like everybody's switching over. I mean, Yakinder obviously did it last year. Snax is now doing it somehow for Gamer Legion and then G2. Like, technically, let's also remind people with the Snax angle, one last thing. He did not actually qualify qualify for the major with that gamer legion team. Like, let's just make that incredibly clear that with that kind of roster, I guess that's like maybe that's maybe actually the requirement to be a G2 in-game leader, that you have to not qualify for the major at least once. So beyond that, I mean, we had Electronic, who was doing it for a little bit for Na'Vi, thought he could keep it up. Obviously, it looked disastrous when he was doing it for Cloud9. But now we have three other guys that are entering the fray trying to be in-game leaders themselves. I mean, we've got Twist is the marquee one here, as he's trying to do it for Liquid. But then for some reason, Hades is suddenly trying to be the in-game leader. And then beyond that, I don't even know why I'm bringing this up, but it's a big name. GG How has Caribou as the in-game leader. It's like, what are we doing? Like, what does everybody think this role is just something you could just like put on some different trousers for the day and suddenly that's you? Like, it doesn't work like that. Like, you need to live it, you need to breathe it. And for some of these guys, it just feels like they can just kind of be tourists in this in-game leader space. If anything, throughout all of these people that are doing it for just these short spans of time, and will eventually, many of them will fail at it. The thing is that like now Nico's looking like one of the people that's making the more shrewd move, that he's the one that has actually experienced it for a length of time. He's the one that actually kind of failed while trying to do it, thinking that he could do better than Kerrigan. And then now he's just saying, you know what? It's actually not for me. And I almost, in a way, have to respect that decision from Nico at this point, just because he's the one with the actual experience doing that. I'm sure that actually I'm not even sure. I think that there's a likelihood that, you know, when Hades or Caribou were coming up in this space, they tried it for a brief period of time in like tier 3 or tier 4 Counter-Strike. But Yekindar and Twist, I mean, like they're LARPing right now. I mean, Electronic 2 is just LARPing. I mean, their belief that they can just take over these teams and just take away the systems away from establishing game leaders and just succeed is just, it's pure cope for the fact that they didn't like the way that their in-game leader was either calling or worse, playing. The fact that they would even like invoke that when really it's a role that's more about how are you fitting into the team, how are you structuring round by round the overall macro game plan. And so I think this is going to be disastrous for some of these players who, in my eyes, are wasting some of their primes. I thought Hades was a totally solid player throughout most of the season. I mean, he had ups and downs, okay? He was inconsistent, but some of his highs were very high. And I feel like now he's probably going to hamstring his career. I think that Twist is probably going to see a degrade in performance. And I'm just going to be real. I think Caribou is just getting a bag right now. So I'm not good for him. Good for him. In fact, you know what, Caribou, keep getting that bag. Get the GG How bag.
Yeah, fair play. Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, we can also point out, you know, Nex are going the other way, and he's now just a player. So shout out to him, because I always felt like he was never a real IGL either. Yeah, I'm with you. And I also think that I'm trying to think of the reason of this, and it's almost like I don't think we get that many like new teams coming to top events anymore where there's like an in-game leader where it's like obvious is the next guy. If I were to pick that right now, I'd say it's probably Sin on M80, and I actually think he is good. But it's kind of like, where is the pipeline of the in-game leaders moving up through the space? Because all of those lower tier teams in general, I feel like they're actually just recycling in-game leaders. It's like Ents just pick up Glaive, and they either just, you know, keep recycling in-game leaders until we run out, or they randomly switch players to in-game leading. So I guess it feels like there's that lack of progression for in-game leaders specifically. I guess the one example outside of that is someone like Shuhei, who actually managed to. But yeah, I think that seems to be a big problem, because like you said, it is a role where you absolutely need to stick to it. Oh, I guess Kixan's the other one who has come up, so fair play to him. But yeah, it just seems like for whatever reason, it's the role that we get the least new blood in, when it's most obviously, to me at least, the role that we have the least overall like ability in right now. So I don't know if that just speaks to the game becoming more individualized, or it's harder to come up with a team nowadays because you don't see teams really breaking through or breaking into top events. But it is a concerning thing, because a lot of our in-game leaders are getting old. Like at some point, Carrigan's going to retire, and we're going to get to the point where it feels like there's not that many great in-game leaders left, which will be very concerning, because that's a huge part of the game. It's probably the main reason a lot of people love the game when you're going as in-depth as we do.
The problem I have with this role is I feel like, I mean, I've made this analogy in the past so people know it already. Like, the most obvious example of why people do this is the same reason why sometimes a rifler will become a primary AWPer for 1 or 2 months, which is when you're the secondary option doing it, you think you're getting a taste of what it's like to do it for real, but you're not actually aware that the reason you're getting a taste instead of the full course meal is you get to opt in and opt out. So in the same way as if you're the secondary AWPer, AWPer, you can just be having a shit game, or they have just like, say, like a godlike T-side AWPer, and you just go, actually, this is the half when I'm not going to AWP. I'm just going to stick with my rifle, and there's no consequence to you. No one expected you to AWP all the time as a secondary AWPer anyway, and if you're just not feeling it, you're not feeling it. So the times that you would actually, because here's the point people aren't going to get, if you had forced yourself to AWP in that setting, you probably get torn up, and that's your really bad half, and your stats going to look shit, and people are going to go, maybe you shouldn't AWP. So in the same way, the problem with the IGLs is they nearly all come from the background of being a secondary caller. So it's even implied like maybe Twists was doing some of the secondary calling in fucking FaZe, and obviously like I'm going to guess this means maybe Hades did some calls in fucking Ents or something. They all do the same thing that Alu did and Sharks back in the day, and they think, but I did a bunch of brilliant secondary calls, so I'm sure I can do, the base strat, because there's the other part that they're missing. And I actually feel like Kirby's a great example of this. I'll tell you why I think Kirby's doing this. I don't think it's just to get the bag. I think he's doing another mistake they all make. They act like IGL is some sort of an infectious disease you can catch by contact. So they're like, but I was around Glaive. It's like you weren't in his brain and you don't have his brain. Do you understand that? Like, you could feed in the same data, Kirby. You could watch the same VOD. You could even call up Zonic and have the same chat. But the problem is, at the end of it, you're going to have Kirby's brain and he has Glaive's brain still. Like, it's the reason why it doesn't matter how many demos Maui downloads, he doesn't become Glaive after watching them. Like, it doesn't matter even if we had the comms, we wouldn't. Like, there's still something in their mind, especially mid-rounding. You can't teach that. You can encourage it. You can help someone. The people who are the best mid-rounders, that is like a skill that, like, incredibly rare in my opinion. Like, it's a feel for the game that just comes. It's why actually the funny thing is, from what I've seen of what happened now in Heroic and Liquid, it actually seems like that might be Cadian's one IGL skill, and maybe he relied on it too much as a crutch, quite frankly. Maybe he wasn't willing to build out a system and a playbook and have other people have agency. Maybe he just lived and died off, if I make this read's right. So the problem I think you have is a lot of them also think, but I was on a team that had a great IGL. I was in the VOD reviews. I heard the strats. I've read the playbooks. And it's like, yeah, but the problem is, I do think that IGL is one of the roles that is the hardest to get really good at, because the job almost scales with like knowledge and experience. So you're automatically way behind all the other people. And as we say, what you're saying there, Hawka, plays against it actually, because they're all veterans. Because the premise is, even when you play in like round 4 of an RMR, you might have to actually play Glaive, the fucking goat of this shit. And even if he has a worse team than you, he might just actually fucking mind game you. He might just be in your head reading what you do and famously recognize. Does no one remember that infamous first LAN back after COVID, I Am Cologne, where it was a studio LAN, and Glaive with the Scoffed Astralis and FaZe and Carrigan without fucking ROPs both took down like the best teams in the world. They just went there with the Heroics and the fucking Gambits of the world, and online those teams were getting them every time. And when it was LAN, Glaive and Carrigan just basically went like, watch this, and just showed you what a fucking IGL can do, and it was like they were fucking reading the Matrix and just making the call, like, do this, do that. And you could tell in that moment, for real, teams like Gambit were like, what the fuck is this? Like, what? This isn't CS. It's like, no, the joke is, mate, this is CS. You were playing some loosey-goosey online bullshit. This is CS. This is where the guy who's the IGL, like, they can kill you dead, mate. The worst thing about it is, like I always say about AWPer, where the worst thing about AWPer is when you go against a better AWPer, you get made to look silly. The same thing happens at IGL. Even if you're doing an okay, let's say, by the way, all the people we mentioned get to a level where they could IGL to, like, that against everyone except the top 20. Well, the problem then is you go to the lands and you're going to be coaching against Snappy, into Carrigan, into Apex, it's like into Shuhei, into Kixan. It's like, bro, you already have to be top 10 to beat these guys. You might get a result of one, or you can fluke it off the, like. So my problem is, most of these people will fail at these roles. I even think, by the way, notice we all keep doing that to give them a chance. Because we were all somewhat wrong about Device, we all go, I mean, I guess Device did it. Did he even, though? Like, at the end of the day, here's what Device did. He managed to IGL to a level that looks fairly good, and he sort of kept like 98% of his skill, but no one still knows, is that actually better than if he had like Glaive back and he was just open again? Maybe the same lineup, but Glaive would actually have won an event. Who knows, right? Because the problem is, Astralis didn't quite get there, did they? They sort of capped out a little bit. They've plateaued to some degree. So I even think if that's the one example, and by the way, anytime you're ever using Simple, Nico, they should be the outlier in almost every example. Like, they're not normal players, are they? Like, they've already sort of shown us they can do things none of us can dream of or even conceptualize. So, no, I just think nearly all those examples are bad moves. Like, even if, by the way, it is the case that Twists, for example, wants to do an Nitro, maybe he wants to completely commit to no longer be a Star Rifle and he wants to be an IGL. Well, I'll tell you the most obvious conclusion of that. I'm not saying you can't do it, but by the way, it'll probably take you a year and a half to get up to speed, and after that year and a half, you will have no individual game anymore. All that shit will have gone. By the way, just like Nitro. Nitro used to be a very good mechanical player, if people don't know. And by the way, when they had that super team, the 2019 lineup, if anything, you were getting more out of him than you should for an IGL, but he was never anywhere close to like winning an MVP. He could never have done it. Like, he was never going to, in fact, I think the best result, it could have been like a 1.1 rating for him. And even that was bonkers to get with like a fucking org back then. So to me, the other downside is if you commit to this, you also it's sink or swim. You either are going to quit, which you've just wasted everyone's time for that period of time, or you're going to become a good IGL, but now you're going to need a star player. So I also think the worst part about this move to me is the moves like the Twists one, because it's implied they think they can have their cake and eat it. And that's my only problem. If he really if Twists told me, bro, I know you think of me as like a mechanical player, but I actually want to just be a tactician. Strategy's what I get off, and I want to I would be like, you know what, I'm in for it. But then you better forget about being a HLTV top 20 player. And in fact, I would say to him this line, here's the banger line. I would go, where am I getting my Twists to play for you then? That would be my line I would say to him for real. Because again, I'm with you. There aren't enough IGLs in the scene. I will say that. North America, by the way, another scene, famously doesn't produce enough IGLs. That's why people like Daps. The joke is Daps probably could just walk back into Liquid if he wanted to. Why? These are people I would take. They've got the experience, you know. So I sort of agree. This is why it's not as hard. It's just bad. Like, I agree with the premise. It's bad, but I can see why each person gets lured into it. Now it's not as stupid as they initially seem, you know.
I hate that the Daps point, I hate that I have to agree with.
So true though, isn't it?
Even just Nitro from NRG right now looking decent versus tier 2 competition, it's like, I honest to God would just take, if Nitro could pull it off like as an op IGL again, I would just say, just do it for Ultimate. Ultimate's completely unproven, and if you can get a lot out of Twists and Naf and Yakindar again, and JKS for that matter, this could be another incredible run for him.
Wouldn't that be spicy? Yeah,
it would be, actually, it would be sick. I think they get a lot of fans back, actually.
Dude,
but I don't think they
just for the freak show element, who the fuck wouldn't watch that? That'd be mad entertaining.
Yeah, and also the thing is, like, Yakindar's best performances with Liquid were when Nitro was in-game leading, like making grand finals in the World Finals and the ESL Pro League. So I don't see why he wouldn't trust him. Sure, he wanted to take it from him, but it could just be, you know, let's break bread again, you know, like extend the olive branch.
By the way, there's an obvious joke I never even thought of from the Yakindar era. Oh, you've nailed it. It's like what I said about Twists. Here's the obvious thing I'd say to Yakindar. Yakindar, do you know why it was working awesome when Nitro was like on paper the IGL, but you got to do whatever you wanted to call everything? Well, you know, when you were the IGL, you didn't have a fucking Yakindar in your ear all the time, did you, cunt? So it's not 1 for 1, is it? Like, where was the guy like you interrupting and giving all his take and going, in Eastern Europe we are doing this? Like, bro, I've always said this story before, but if I was their coach, when Yakindar popped up, like, but in VP, I'd be like, no one gives a fuck about Bandcamp, you can't shut the fuck up. You know, I won a Grand Slam. You won a Flashpoint, whatever. It's the way I would even burn my own tournament. I know. That would be the ultimate betrayal too, because how could they say shit then if I say it as well? All you won was a Flashpoint, motherfucker.
Oh man.
Okay. Right. Okay. My bad point is this. It's funny thing is, people are actually going to be confused when I say this. It's that it was announced that HObbit is now in 1 win. Right. I'm going to read out the lineup of 1 win for you. It is, get ready to be severely depressed, Maui, because you're going to go, yeah, it's not a bad lineup. What year did you say it is again? Bro, this is so sad. Right, the lineup is Buster. Oh, he's still around. Yeah, don't worry. You know that guy like 4 years ago was really, he's still around. Don't worry about that. He's still around. Neelan. Oh, Neelan. E.G. Neelan. Oh, he's around. Don't worry about that. Latik, who's the one Russian player. Then we've got someone from, I think that's Uzbekistan, called rigoN, and then HObbit, and then Solar, who's their coach. Actually, he's been in like the K23 in the Kazakhstan scene a long time. They all know, blah, blah, blah. The problem with this lineup is this. You think to yourself, you know what, Buster, I guess if he's pretty good, that could be all right. Like Neelan, he's an okay IGL. If HObbit's good, it's like, yeah, but bro, that's like the best aspect of the team. And notice like there was already a bunch of question marks there. Like, this team is ass. This team is fucking ass. This team fucking sucks. Like, what is this team? Like, here's why this blows. Because the problem you have is this. One, Cloud9 obviously wasn't that awesome most recently when HObbit was in it. But people might forget, dude, he was actually one of the people who turned his game around. HObbit was one of the better players in that team. And here's the sad thing. He is 30 years old now. So I think a mixture of his age and the fact that in people's brains, he's one of the not as good Gambit players because they just think it was Shiro and Axel the whole time, combined with he obviously just isn't a hot property anymore. So sadly, it seems like this is just a last chance saloon and he's just going to gradually go out the scene. Whereas I'm going to say this right now. In a scene where people are trying to beg for like Forest to get like a top 20 team, bro, HObbit should be on a top 10 team. What are you talking about? Like, forget the name. He's actually a 30-year-old that actually frags, bro. Like, he's actually a solid player still. And obviously, I'll just throw this in there finally. All reports I have ever heard about this guy is he is like one of those players where it's not that he doesn't have a bad attitude. He is like an overwhelmingly good attitude and removes the potential for a bad attitude in your team. Like, he's one of those people who, like, he's like a fucking air freshener to, like, make it all just, like, smell nicer in the room and give you a better vibe and fucking soothe everyone. So, to me, it's a player where, again, isn't this like a slam dunk player to sign to a top tier? I don't get what's going on at this point in time. I'd even say this, even if this is controversial. I actually think the mistake Virtus Pro has is they're doing some HLTV forums, like, stack the roster. Like, bro, you should probably take one of those players out and put in a HObbit. They'd probably actually, like, create some space, shore up the squad, experience. Like, I can't believe, that's why I say I've had to put it as a bad point. On paper, like, I want to believe it's cool he gets to play still. Like, why does he have to be on this team, though? Like, remember, this is the team, guys, that Boomich had to go to after Boomich had done some really insane shit outside of the server and ruined his whole rep. HObbit has to go there for I don't even know what reason. What, because Electronic left? Like, why is he in one win? Your thoughts, guys? Thoughts?
Yeah. I also pretty sure, like, when Boomich went there, I think they at least had, like, Deco. Or
They had some alright players.
Like, some
yeah.
players. Yeah, like, this is bad. And also, I remember, I think it was, like, 2020, or it was after HObbit left Gambit previously, he went down to Windstrike. And even then, that team was like, it had like Bondic, it had Elliot.
No, that was
like,
on the rise up again, yeah.
Yeah, it had some all right players. And I think that's how he got back into the scene when he dropped off in the first place a little bit.
Yes.
Whereas this team is like, it is like that bad that we probably won't see him again for a long, long time. And as you pointed out,
I would challenge anyone, go look up HObbit stats in Cloud9 in CS2. You'll actually be shocked by the fragging he's doing. He was pretty legit again, yeah.
Yeah, he's actually pretty good, and it's like it's not like there are teams that couldn't use him. I mean, you'd even rather him be on like Bet Boom, right, or like whatever. So
also,
like
bro,
that.
I'm just gonna say this: he's one of the people that speaks pretty good English, dude. Why can't he be on a G2 or something? You know what I mean? Like, I'd take that over a Snax type, obviously for the IGL and get it, but like, no, I just don't get it, mate. To me, this is like almost a slam dunk player that should have loads of options, you know.
Yeah, he played on Hellraisers for a little bit back in the day, so like he's willing to do that for sure. Yeah, actually very surprising. I didn't even realize the lineup.
I think it went under the radar for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that their lineup was like at least they had some like up and coming players or something about them, but yeah, I guess we're not going to see HObbit for a while, and that sucks because like you said, he's getting on. So I don't even know how you work back from there. Like that's actually going to be so hard. Oh boy.
I did a power ranking on my stream today before we recorded this, and I actually put Windstrike in it, but it's out of the top 30. So even like bumping them up from their current ranking, because like, for example, like last season, they were with Jo, who was a strict downgrade for HObbit. They were 47th at their peak. So I put them at like 35th or 36th, actually, for the... I think I put them at 36th right now. But I was being kind of generous. It was like, okay, they have to all play at the best of what they were doing last season. And HObbit should give them, say, a 10%, 15% boost in performance. But that still means that they're having to slog through Tier 2/3 European Cups all the time, where teams like that are still on the come up today are going to have to battle them. Like I don't necessarily think they're better than Bleed or like a Game and Gladiators or like a Bait or a Gamer Legion, even, for that matter. So it's like there's so many teams that they're going to have to overcome for HObbit to get anywhere back close to a top 30 roster, and that's where it's very difficult to see him finding a spot. That being said, like, because he can actually speak English well, like he was one of the only people on that Gambit / Cloud9 roster that would give us pretty good English interviews.
He even has a good accent, dude. He doesn't even have like that brutal Eastern. He has like a very like smooth accent too.
Right. So he could easily. I mean, I don't know how fast he thinks. You know, I assume that he's
Sure.
going to be a little bit slower. But really, yeah. I mean, you mentioned Bet Boom. I feel like there's a couple teams like Bait that you. I mean, I think maybe they want to all say Ukrainian, but I don't think they have really. They shouldn't have a problem with Kazakhstani people. I would hope, and that would even be a better landing spot for him overall. And they've been better lately. I feel, yeah, like Bet Boom would have been the obvious one, but maybe he doesn't. I don't know what his feelings are about joining that kind of roster. But he would be with Nafany again at the very least, and I feel like Bet Boom could use it, player like him. Like Bet Boom right now is like, you know, Chiron's so weird. Like Chiron's kind of been weird. I mean, Zorte's not getting the most out of his potential necessarily. Like I think if you went say 1-for-1, just HObbit for Siren, I think this team maybe even enters the top 20. I think they could or they are in the top 20. I think they enter the top 15. Like that's kind of what this kind of upgrade would be because Siren's just super inconsistent for them. He doesn't play the best roles, but HObbit would play those roles and play them better.
It is
opinion,
weird
so.
he's not a slam dunk to join that team as well. He's not Nefarian, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see how that guy wouldn't
Yeah.
vouch for him.
It's
Yeah,
weird,
no.
isn't it?
Siren's only good against like pretty much bad opposition, but anyone good, like Hobbit's just way better. Just way better.
Yeah, and even there, Thorin's kind of right. I would actually be a little disappointed even if he joined Bet Boom. I'd have thought he could join a better team than that.
Why
But,
not?
Yeah, it's not even Bet Boom. Oh,
I mean,
boy.
by the way, I'll just throw this out there. Like, this is one of those things people have got to stop doing. We've got to stop this thing where we take orgs like Liquid in G2, and when you don't want me to let the player join, you just act like they only sign the best players. But then in reality, they sign like Rainwaker and fucking Ultimate and fucking Malbs and Nexa. It's like, which is it? Because if we're signing those players, you can have HObbit in fucking Liquid too. Why not? Why can't he be in fucking, you know what I mean? Like, they should at least be on the radar. You got to at least consider it, surely. Right,
Yeah,
let's move on.
realistically, a lot of spots he could have landed. Yeah.
Right, Hawka, what is your bad point? Oh, ugly
ugly, right?
point. Yes, ugly.
Yeah. The my ugly point is so the Razer Snap Tap thing. I've seen it being discussed by Rops quite a bit. I can't remember who I saw tweeting this, but I'm pretty sure it was someone reputable. Basically, and I sort of heard this as well. Basically, I think players have been using this before it got released,
Right.
Which is kind of wild to me because basically, as far as I'm aware, what it does, I think. I don't know the exact mechanics, but I think it's like as soon as you release your finger off the key, it kind of just counter strafes for you. Or it's like when you click it, counter strafes quickly. Either way, everyone that I've heard to talk to that is like to talk to about this, they basically said it makes the movement feel so much more responsive, way smoother. I've heard people describe it as like it's way closer to going back to CSGO movement, where it feels like counter strafing is just way better and way less slidey.
The explanation, if you look online, says this, Hawkers. I think we can infer this. It says Snap Tap mode enhances responsiveness by prioritizing the latest input between two selected keys without requiring the release of the previous key. So I think the premise in the situation you're talking about is, as opposed to having to completely let one key come up to counter strafe, you could essentially like instantly counter strafe like the second it made, whether you've released or not. So I think the premise is just that you would have like an edge over the person who has to like fully release the key. I think that's what they're implying the like mechanical edge would be.
Gotcha, yeah. And listen, either way, whatever it is, I've heard people say it's like it's noticeable.
It sounds like
that's
it,
for sure.
sure.
And like I think it's a cool thing to try and release, and it's like I think Rob's having that discussion. I think it's a good discussion to have about it. But the ugly thing being, like, some teams, from what I understand, got access to this, and some teams didn't. And it is kind of scary to me that a peripheral company can, you know, come out with a feature like this, can potentially beta test it with some teams, and then I'm not going to, like, I've heard potentially players that might have been using it and might have not been. But like some of the players that are using it seem to have actually improved in performance. And I don't even want to like be thinking about that at all, right? Like I don't want it to be that unfair playing field. So
the way you're saying that, it just makes me want to like for real do like one of those ESL skits, but in real life where we just high Norbert up like, come on Norbert, what is it? What's the dark tech you've got? What is it, Snapchat? What do you got? We got some sort of aimbot working on. What you got, son? Listen, you're not going home until we get the truth, son. What's going on? It can't have just been overpass, Norbert. Exactly. It can't have just been overpass, mate. What is it? We need to know.
I mean, I think Maus were actually using it for ESL Pro League.
Okay.
So I feel like that's, I mean, at least when Razer advertised it, they advertise it as like Exertion is one of the people that is actually saying stuff about it. And I mean, if you think back to ESL Pro League, he was right there, hot on the heels of Zywoo to win MVP.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty frustrating to now look back at that and think, did Exertion have a slight unfair advantage in terms of the fact that his mechanics were probably sharper due to an assist? It's like, it's not as drastic maybe as aim assist, but it is, if they're saying it makes it different, if pros are literally vouching for it, it does make it, that should make a difference. Like, I don't think it's not placebo. Okay, I'll say this, 100% it's not placebo, because it is literally inputting something for you, and there's this now debate that's going on about it. Yeah, I think that it's almost just like you have to even the playing field, or you have to not let people use it. I mean, Rob's even described it like it's kind of like a macro. It's almost like you have a macro, which it was banned, because if people remember at the beginning of the subtick debates, that there was this way to use alias keys that would essentially cancel out your movement faster than you not having it. And so if the keyboard is doing it for you, I don't see how that's also not allowed. I just don't get it. At least in the way that Rob's explained it, because I'm sure that he's diving in deeper than most people on these kinds of things. He always seems to be up to date on the latest specs and the tech and stuff. So I just think you either have to even. Well, the thing is that actually, what's funny is that I think the ESL admin Mihao said that it is allowed, that you can use it, but the problem is that there's deals with a lot of these teams where they actually are sponsored, and they have to they're using X keyboards. And I think one of the things that most of these players do is like, there's different gear sponsorships. So I'm gonna like, for a little bit of clarity here, sometimes when you're playing at these tournaments, you have to use specific like overhead ears, because you just need to cancel sound so you can't hear the commentators. But you usually, for a lot of gear sponsors, I've heard, you don't always need to use their mouse, because they do relinquish control of that. Because even if you're a certain peripheral company, they realize, we can sponsor you, but you can use another person's mouse, because that's going to affect your gameplay so drastically. And if we don't have one for you, then you use that. But a lot of them do use their keyboards, because people are pretty forgiving about the keyboards they use. It doesn't really matter, as long as you're using the same switches, like, Cherry, MX, Browns, or Reds, or whatever. It doesn't matter what the actual framework of the keyboard is. But if you're Razer, I'm pretty sure you're going to just want everybody to use this. And and the other thing is that if you're Logitech and you don't have this tech, now all the teams that are sponsored by you better get tech like this, or they're going to actually be behind.
My problem with this topic is, I think it's really tricky, because essentially what Rops is actually saying, if you look at like contextually the way he's making his statement, he's not saying this is cheating and it should never be allowed in CS. What he's essentially suggesting is, it's just like too short term. Some people aren't aware of it. It's giving an edge. And what about the people who don't use it, for example? That's like more, to me, it's more like, what do we do today? In the same way as when there's sometimes a radical patch update, the question isn't, will we ever go to the patch? It's just, when do you implement it? Do you do it now during the tournament? Do you wait till afterwards? Do you wait before the big kind of eats? Normally it's like that discussion. So I want to immediately make sure that's not missed on people, because the problem I have with this topic is this is where I feel like it's actually people are getting weird narrative angles where they don't know what this does. Like, for example, I'm actually certain, I know what morons are like, Hawka. I've spent too much time on the internet reading the opinions of morons. I know how they think. I guarantee you, because it's called Snap Tap, that there's a type of idiot who still hasn't read, and they think it's something like that feature you can have in like Photoshop, where when you make a straight line, roughly, it'll snap into a straight line. I think they're worried it's like an aimbot. Like, it's like COD auto aim, where if you go really close, it just snaps on the head, basically. I think they're going to think, because of the word snap, which in this case I actually think plays against what you want, they mean snap in the sense that you can incredibly quickly press another key. But that's not really what we think of with snap. We think of snapping onto someone with a crosshair, don't we? So the problem is, anything that would help you do that would obviously be cheating by definition. It would make aiming easier. This doesn't, by the way, as far as I can tell, let you get a kill easier. All it allows you to do is things like different movements and a slightly quicker do it. So what I don't get is this. I actually, as far as I can tell, no one who's knowledgeable is implying this is cheating or like has broken CS. The real issue is more like, as Maui says, is more, what about teams that, and by the way, you'll notice, Maui, it's generally smaller teams that have to do the deal where we actually have to use your mouse, company X, because that's like a leverage point, isn't it? You're right. If it's a FaZe clan, spoiler, you can use whatever you want, because if you're in FaZe clan, the actual, it might sound counterintuitive, but for the top teams, because their players are so good, it's actually bad PR if that player joined FaZe and then you knew he had to change his mouse, and it just so happened he's worse on a Razer mouse, for example, since we use a Razer here. They don't want it to be that the fan realizes, shit, actually the mouse made him worse. So in a way, you avoid that by going, everyone can use whatever they want. And then it's not even inferred you made them and they chose not to. Everyone uses what they want. So what you'll usually get is, I'm sure there'll be at least one player probably use it in each team anyway. So you get around that angle. And then, yes, everyone uses what they want. And the reason why that's so big is because, one, back in the day, I've told this story before, but if you go back like 15 years, when I used to work for SK Gaming, I can tell you there was actually a tournament that only me and about 10, 15 players at that tournament will know the story, where basically there were two teams who played in the final of a 1.6 tournament. Both of them were sponsored by the same mouse company. One of them had the aforementioned deal where they all had to use the mouse. The other one had the deal where everyone can use whatever they want. And so, by the way, in that scenario, you could just use other mice within their line. You didn't have to use the latest one. The team that had the deal where they had to use the latest mouse was scoffed. They lost that final. The team that could use whatever version of the mouse, including other mice within the line, they won that final. And the people involved in this, it could never be said publicly because sponsors like that were everything back then. But I can tell you, those players on both sides, if they were given the truth serum on this show now, they would tell you Thorin is telling the truth. Like, basically, that mouse probably decided who won that match. So that's why, in the modern day, the only teams you're going to get doing that are essentially smaller orgs. Maui might even have inferred one of them before in his statement. Smaller orgs were essentially, to get the bigger access to the money, it's just worth it for them to say, you know what, we'll just tell our players they have to use it. So if you're that player, the obvious problem becomes, if you're with a company that doesn't have this tech, you automatically have a mild disadvantage. Now, that in itself, the problem with that is, I don't really know that that's a TO's job. You know what I mean? Like, why is it on the ESL to decide whether you should have a fucked up deal with a mouse sponsor or whether you should get one where they can use what you want? So I don't know why ESL would ban it. And I'll just say this. This actually sounds like it's just the future of keyboards and that everyone's going to put this tech in. Listen, they'll all have to name it something different because of how like patents work and stuff. But eventually, like with everything on phones where we can all do the zoom out and do all that, eventually all this tech will get implemented one way or another. So to me, I think it's inevitable. This is probably the future. By the way, actually one of the stupidest, like, weird bottlenecks in gaming with mouse and PC is that there are people who use a very basic bitch PC that can only press like 4 keys down at the same time. Like those membrane ones that people in theory at home are probably still using. Those are like absurdly shit compared to the really good mechanical ones. So, spoiler, you don't know this, but you already were at a way bigger advantage than the Pro does have the Snap Tap. So I think, quite frankly, to me, this is obviously the way we're going to go. So the bigger issue is more just like, can you really ban something? Like in this scenario, if this is actually better, logically, shouldn't all the pros just buy this? In the same way as, I'll use this analogy for you. When they first brought out optical and laser mice, so that was a different generation. It went from ball mouse to laser mouse to optical to laser, which was like more powerful. And I can tell you, every time we switched, initially it was worse. Like actually, initially the tech would be scuffed, and if you moved over, you'd be the one with the disadvantage first. But obviously, eventually, all those techs got better, and eventually, you wouldn't use a ball mouse today, right? But technically, Hawka, you could turn up and enter with a ball mouse. So what's the rule I'm making here? Like, do I have to ban everyone from having laser mice because you're playing with a shitty ball mouse? No. Eventually it just becomes, if you want to be in the same tournament, I'd suggest you buy a laser mouse. But at the end of the day, I'm a ESR. I don't tell you what to buy. You turn up with whatever mouse you want, son. So I actually think this is a little bit of a storm in a teacup. Like, I get why Rops is upset about it. It's actually kind of the job of pros to be like, hey, this is going to affect this next match, and you know, maybe my teammate doesn't have that or whatever. I get that, but I actually think this is something that will just be resolved over time. Like, it doesn't sound like it's cheating. It sounds like it is better, quite frankly. It even sounds like something we all wanted but didn't know we wanted. And I would hope either within a few months every company has their own, or everyone could just use whatever this is if it's the OP one for now, you know.
Yeah, I get you. I think, yeah, that's why my main thing was like, from what I understand, players were using it in tournaments before it got released.
Makes sense. Why wouldn't you? Yeah. Like I say, it's not cheating as far as I know. Yeah.
But that does feel like, you know,
it's a little bit sauce.
It's harsh to me.
Yeah.
Like, if I was on another team, I would be a bit pissed.
Yeah, but I'll just say as a disclaimer, I am still one of those people, whether you think I'm mad or not, who to this day doesn't think Fnatic should ever have had to disclose that boost and thinks they should absolutely be able to pull that out like some Yu-Gi-Oh move, like, oh, you've activated my trapper. I loved that shit. I thought that was straight fire. I loved the whole time those friends. What is he doing? Oh my God! Where is he? I cannot shoot him. No, I was fucking. Oh, it was delicious. Oh, let me eat your suffering. Yes, your French despair. Your ennui shocked. Your ennui. Anyway, whatever. So I won't go back into a whole thing there. But I'm the only person in the world who didn't think they should have reported it to Valve or whatever. Like, no, fuck that. I've got some fucking flying VTech. I'm not just telling the coach that before I do the game, you dickhead. I need to pull that out to win. And by the way, they did win that game. I've always told this is how gangster I am. I used to actually literally, while bantering, having drinks with them after events when they were envious, whenever people like Apex and fucking Happy would get too cocky, I would always tell them, well, it's fucking Rich, you're talking shit. You're the only person to ever win a major without winning all the fucking matches, you idiot. Spoiler, they didn't appreciate that one, but it was banter. It was banter. Well, I say banter. They were probably just getting their feelings hurt, but I was like, haha, yeah. All still mates, one of those ones. The classic one in the bar that we all know where, they maybe took it too seriously. Right. What is your ugly point, Maui?
Mine is, it's a good and a bad wrapped into one. That's why it's an ugly. So okay. I am very optimistic. I'm very positive. I just flat out like what Valve has done for their latest map editor. I feel like Hammer++ on the Source 2 engine has done a lot of good for mappers. There's a couple of videos online you could look up to all the differences here, but really if you just go on YouTube and just search up like Hammer++, you'll see a handful of these features. But there's so many different ways that this is going to improve people's lives when it comes to mapping, where you don't have to render everything. I think that's the biggest overall change. It's just that you can now change lighting or objects on the map, and instead of having to re-render the entire map all the way through again, you just get to see it live in a kind of like condensed version of what it is that you're putting together. And so my mind was just kind of racing on the fact that now mappers are just going to be faster. They're just going to be way faster. They're going to put more ideas together, more beautiful creations, because Thera is really cool right now. FM Pwn put that in the map pool recently, the competitive map pool, not the active duty one. And then also Mills, even though I don't really like that, or Mill, I don't really like this new map. It's not the old CPL Mill, by the way. It's just kind of a new map that has the name Mill. I don't really like it that much, but I think it looks kind of pretty here and there. And I'm just kind of thinking there's so many different ways that this could improve the space. But the problem is that I don't see, or I have heard that there is not a consistent roadmap of any sort to get your map actually into the pool. So this is the ugly side of things. Valve have created this incredible tool, Hammer++, Source 2 engine, and they have kind of marred this experience for us as esports fans, because as far as I know, FM Pwn talking to Launder said there's no real way to know if your map's going to make it. There's no real roadmap. You just kind of have to make it, hope that it gains a lot of public traction, that Valve seemingly look down upon you well, and that you can't speak negatively about Valve. If you say anything about Valve negatively at all, even if you have the best map, you're never even going to be looked at. And so that's kind of my ugly here. It's that instead of actually bringing a new map to the table in the most recent map cycle, who thought we were going to talk about map cycle in the middle of the player break, really, or the very end of it? It's that there's no way it's probably even going to make it. Like you could put forward a work of art like the next Mirage in terms of playability, but Valve might never even really give it a second glance. And I think that's kind of the ugly here, that you kind of create this incredible tool. It's like you create all the paint, the oil paintings and the easel and everything, the canvas to make the Mona Lisa, but then you're just putting it in a dark warehouse. So that's my ugly here. That you Valve giveth, and Valve, it's not necessarily they taketh, they just don't really give what they should.
I feel like that's like just for the entire life cycle of Counter-Strike. It's like the same sort of thing of like, I the thing came out today where I think it was like Valve have a total of 180 employees or something crazy. Yeah. And you're sitting there like, okay, listen, I don't like companies like overemploying as much as anyone. I think so many tech companies just employ for unnecessary reasons. But this is the one rare case where I'm like, come on, guys. Like literally with the amount that Counter-Strike has given you, why not employ one guy whose maybe job it is to, I don't know, part of his job can be, let's look through some maps and try and find some maps that are playable and find a way to push maps. And that it's just everything in Counter-Strike. It's like you could hire people for so many different things, and you almost get sick of talking about it because low-key, deep down, you know it will never happen. It's like you're chasing a girl who you know you're never going to get, and at some point you just give up and you say, screw it, at this point, it is what it is, and I'll take what I can get from Valve at this point.
I will
like
say
dating pool chronicles with Hawka.
what meta was he leaning into there? No, the problem is, I actually do agree. Like one of the problems I do think you have with making the maps, etc., is basically, I mean, the best way to explain it is if you know the history of Counter-Strike, which I always explain, I always have to go to pains to explain to people. CS, basically, if you know what CS 1.6 looked like, so if you played it at the end at all, I'm sure everyone knows basically what it looked like. That game is like 97% what it was at the end of the betas. Like what they changed after that was very small margins. Some of it even watered the game down and made it like not as good. You couldn't do certain things. You couldn't like quick scope with the AWP as much. And so there's certain things they changed, like how fast the gun would come out. Like you couldn't bunny hop around it. So actually, if people don't know, the game basically was never made by Valve. They just maintained and then slightly tweaked 1.6. The reason I always bring that up is because the joke goes like this. The way current day CS works, there would be no Counter-Strike. That only exists because there was an open modding community and they had the thing in the developer kit that just said, like, you can make what you want, but psst, we own it if you make it. So that's why they ended up owning Counter-Strike and whatever Day Defeat or whatever the fuck other games they did at the time, Team Fortress, whatever it might be, right? When they do this, the problem is, with the modern climate, not only would you not have Counter-Strike, there'd be no mod to make, but the way the maps came about, a lot of people don't know this. People think people at Valve made the map. They didn't. Like, the maps in CS were made by community people. So if you go and look up the guy who made Dust 2 and Inferno and Nuke and those maps, like, they're just random guys. Like, some of them, like, later sold maps to Valve. Some of them even worked a little bit at Valve. But that wasn't, like, top-down. Someone at Valve said, hey, make a map. I want it to be one where T's dominate. And he went, hey, sir, I've brought up Dust 2 for you. And then he goes, and then I want a map that's sort of like a bit balanced and it's more like, it's not so much dominated by the AWP because it's going to be short lanes. I've got Inferno for you. So no one did that. Like, so the problem is, current day Valve is some sort of top-down approach, you notice, where they maintain a lot of control, like a lot of game devs do. And so as we're saying, it's more like, right, there's this really limited way you can get your map in. It's like, if you fit all this criteria, it gets just enough popularity mixed with, like, you didn't insult us, and like some people, and then it's the right time for the, to be, and your map's in. But there's no, the guy who put it in, there's no way he could know it was ever going to get in. So as a result, by the way, he couldn't design the map like with competitive in mind. In theory, even, by the way, here's a nightmare. Because you have to sort of get community general hype before it'll ever be in like the pro map pool, you also have to make it appeal to randoms and people potentially playing like Wingman and shit and idiots that don't even know CS. And then it has to get through that sluice gate, which already is going to be hard enough. And then it has to be good for pros. Like, fucking hell, mate. Like, your chances are so low. Whereas, the point I'm making is, I think, again, if CSGO was the first version of Counter-Strike to ever exist, you wouldn't have Dust 2 and Inferno and all that. You'd maybe have, like, one or two of these maps that got through this weird system, and then you'd have a bunch of maps that, by the way, if you look at the world of Valorant, where they top-down made all the maps, that's a fucking nightmare. If you don't know, to this day, the map's probably the shittest part of Valorant. Actually, other parts of the game even grow on me, because it has that, like, MOBA element to it. It has, like, sort of the strategy of the ults and the comp. There's parts about Valorant that are very positive, but the areas where it directly compares with CS, like the maps, I can tell you, not only do the people who played CS fucking hate those maps, but they all agree they're just nowhere close to what the... I'm just somewhat fat where I'm on it a second there with there. They just all agree that, like, yeah, it went to shit. Like, that's the worst part of the game. But the problem is, in there, if you don't know, they can't really complain about it because it's Riot, and people, they get upset if you complain. So if you think Valve's bad, Riot's even worse. But I do think the biggest problem here is, that's essentially what I'd also heard, Maui, many, many years ago from FM Porn. And the reason why hearing it from FM Porn is the Bomber guys, is because he's the one who's vaguely connected to the fucking esports scene. So, and also, in theory, has the most famous example of an added map not by Valve. So if anything, he should be the blueprint for what you do. And he's sort of telling you, fucked if I know, you just sort of, you know, do a bunch of weird cargo cult things and then question mark, question mark, question mark, your map's in the game, I guess. Like, bro, how's that supposed to fill me with confidence? I'm actually, if I'm an up-and-coming map maker, that actually makes me think, maybe I'll go and do a different game. What's the point in this? Like, how do I ever get in? And that last part, by the way, is the Bomber. Because everything in Counter-Strike culture goes counter to that. Counter-Strike culture is about the idea that Valve are the company that is cool and doesn't mind if you flame them. And so when I say that I don't like the format of the Major, I don't say I think it's an inefficient format. I go, this format's fucking shit compared to Katowice. And what's normally cool about Valve is they don't go, ban this fuck, unless you're too good. Like, in theory, they just let you get away with it, don't you? So the problem I feel like is this. Everyone's so trained to flame everything, it's going to be also really hard for someone to make a dope map and then go through a lot of frustration and never express that. So I feel like, unfortunately, with the way we all flame balance in the game, everyone's almost incentivized to fuck up and not get their map in the game at this point. So I just worry that we're not going to have a great future for maps, because I do feel like maps is the most obvious area Valve should have invested loads of money back into the game. Because think about it, what makes Counter-Strike different is the maps. The maps is what changes the meta. Like, people talk about balancing the guns. No, the beauty of CS is once guns make sense, you don't touch them. You leave it and you keep that static so that you have like for example, I'm sure you've all found this yourself on shows. It's already tricky enough talking about a player and then realizing like, shit, but now I'd be talking about his event in CSGO at the end with CS2 now. Should I reference that? Should I not? It's slightly different, isn't it? It's even worse when the guns are different. Like, everyone knows you have to mention if it was the AUG meta versus like a normal era where all the guns were somewhat balanced. So my biggest problem in the modern day is you want the maps to have variety to keep the game fresh and to bring this new meta. But I think with the current system we've got, it's going to always move at this snail's pace. It's going to be like a new map every year and a half. It's not going to be like this thing that people want of like seasons and swapping in and out and the idea of like, versatility where you can like put a map in but then bring it back. They've never even ever implied they're going to have a guy who thinks that way or liaises with the community. So the map thing in general is a bummer, because I agree. Essentially, the original point Maui made was the tech now to make the map is in theory way better and you can do it much quicker. But the issue is that's not going to at all help the bottleneck, which appears to be on the Valve end. Like, essentially, you can make the map equally as quick, but it might still take a year or two to get in the fucking pool, which just feels like a bummer, because I feel like that's how if people say they're bored of CS, I think what they're actually saying is I'm bored of just playing the same maps. They're not bored of the game. The mechanics brilliant in the game. I think they just want some variety. So I'm fine with giving it to them. Give them an extra map pool. Give them swap 2 maps in and 2 maps out and allow us to bring them back, etc., without full reworks. I'd be open for all these options. I feel like at the moment, without sounding too cynical, I do feel like we've got like a worst of all worlds on the whole map situation. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah. I think like one thing, just the last point here, I guess, is that with this editor, you can experiment so much because there are slightly different mechanics. Like the way I think the most popular one in pro play is that you throw a smoke that kind of lands on a higher ledge, and then the smoke waterfalls over into some other area. And you could make maps where that's kind of built into it. You could have a ledge that you throw the smoke into, and then it kind of waterfalls down. And there aren't any maps like that. Like, we kind of feel like we're playing on CS2 mechanics, but we're playing on CS:GO maps. There should be some sort of, like, they haven't even necessarily addressed the fact that the height is different of the smokes. Like, they could make different layers and just kind of like the heights of things. Right now, it feels like you're kind of fighting on the kind of top edge of a few of the smokes here and there on certain maps, when like they could be slotting have these little edges or little ledges for smokes to land on, which would make the game so much more. It would just feel like it makes more sense given the other mechanics that they've changed between Go and 2.
I'll just very, very quickly add on, because I know we're going on a bit.
You can
I'll
go.
very quickly add on.
Go for it.
Just that, also, like you brought up the custom maps thing back in the day. People probably won't even know, like, there were custom game modes back in the day. Like, I got into CS playing like jail servers, mini game servers, gun game servers, all these random ones. And I'm just realizing, why have Valve never just made like surf in the game? Like, I know we don't always talk about the casual community as much, but like surf was like really big for a long
as far
time.
as I know,
put it in with a tutorial. People love that.
As far as I know, in both Counter-Strike and StarCraft Brood War, the main thing casuals played were other game modes. Like in Brood War, people played like 2v2 games and shit like that, didn't they? Like, it wasn't like the original esports game. That's too hardcore. I'm with you.
For Brood War, I barely even play. I just played like Sunken D, and then the one where you just have all of the minerals right by your base. Fastest. Yeah, exactly. Big game hunters, yeah.
Yeah, that's the classic one everyone played, exactly. The joke is some people probably think that is Brood War in the same way as someone who only played Dota All-Stars wouldn't know what Warcraft 3 is, if you know the analogy. Like, Oh,
that too. Yeah, I never even played Warcraft 3. I just played Dota. Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay, my ugly point is going to be a good one here, because I actually think there's a lot you can do with it. People just won't realise. This is the ugly point, right? Have you seen the roster that was just announced for Into the Breach? I will read it to you. The roster, it says, right, notice I put it in ugly though. I didn't put it in bad. The roster is smooya, formerly of, Fnatic, all those other teams, Big, etc. You have 2 players from Bad News Eagles. You have Synopsy and Juan Flatro. Okay, interesting. You have Chaos, formerly of Gamer Legion, and then you have Boros, most recently of Falcons, and obviously Monty before that, right? The reason why I have picked ugly to put this in is because what's mad is, on paper, that's actually, like, before you consider any context, that's a banger lineup. Bro, you actually look at those names and you think, remember, of all the orgs that made that run, by the way, Into the Breach always should have been the worst because they didn't have actually real legit star players. Like, remember, their best player was fucking Cypher or like mega washed Rallen, for fuck's sake. So they were never working with, a Kixon and a fucking Immer and the people that everyone thought really could be someone. But also, as an org, you were nobodies. Like, Into the Breach is just some random, they're not even the biggest, they're just some random UK org that locked into it and got the sticker money and everyone saw, unlike the others, Gamer Legion and Apex stayed relevant for a while. They were never relevant. They immediately dropped off. No one gave a fuck. It wasn't even just that Cypher left. They were never anything and they never were gonna be anything. So when you consider that, you look at this lineup and you go, bro, this ain't bad actually. Like, look at this lineup. First of all, none of those players in theory are bad, right? Even if you're gonna flame Chaos, that's because he was playing at tier 1 for fuck's sake, right? I'm gonna assume he can play at tier 1.5 and tier 2. In fact, you even look at the roles, bro, they've sort of nailed the roles. Like, so you've got fucking Synopsy to be the IGL. Okay, by the way, he was working with fraggers before. He's got his main fragger, one flat row. You've added Smooya as like an aggressive AWPer. You've got Boros as an aggressive rifler. And you've got Chaos to be like a supportive element. Like, this is that. You're looking at it more and more and you go, dude, they've actually sort of smurfed. Like, for the level they're at, haven't they sort of got some players who probably should be better than their level? Like, shouldn't some of these players be on OG or joining ENTS or something, But this is where the ugly part comes in. Because I'm just going to put it out there. So first things first, Smooya is probably one of the biggest liabilities ever in Tier 1 Counter-Strike. One, he has literally removed himself from teams when he didn't like how things were going. And then here's a good one for you. I've asked teams like Chaos, Fnatic when he was there. Spoiler, it wasn't just that some GM kicked him. The players didn't want him in these teams. Like, they all will tell you the same thing. Either, it's never that he's a shit player. It's always like, either he was like just obnoxious to someone or he just like argues in a way where it's annoying even if he's not trying to be an arsehole, basically. Like, essentially, he's the kind of guy who will get on your nerves after enough time. Then add in the fucking drama, because let's be real, the worst part about Smooya is the streaming persona, because he can't stop the streaming persona bleeding into the professional player persona. And so the streaming persona is the kind of idiot that would make an incredibly incendiary political statement after a fucking game between two teams where the whole thing you're trying not to do is ever reference the real life, really awkward political situation. Like, that's the sort of idiot that you've got in your team. So already, that is the definition of a ticking time bomb, both in the team environment and then for potential drama it'll cause you. So already, that's worrying me, because on this lineup, I'm supposed to want him to be like one of my best players. Like, if this team bangs, wouldn't he be one of my top 20 players to make like 19th in the world? Then you got the Boros angle. Now, anyone who watched Falcons, obviously Boros gets a lot of goodwill because people think he was unfairly kicked. I've told this story before. Sadly, it's not my story to tell. So right now I feel a bit uncomfortable saying what happened. But the saddest part about that story is, it's like what everyone it's going to turn out in a year from now got wrong about the Stabby move. You're now going to find out in a few months from now that Stabby, it now looks like, were right. They were right that Cadian was the problem, was the dickhead, and needed to be removed, and they had to get away from him. So similarly, you will find out in the future, by hook or by crook, I promise you, that Boros not only should have been kicked, but what he did was so unacceptable that I actually think the fuck up wasn't, I mean, obviously the main fuck up was those people releasing that video, but the main fuck up was actually that the people in Falcons, it's the other way around, you idiots. They're too nice guys. Sadly, they're too nice, and they're actually covering for this guy and carrying water for what he did. And what he did, it's not in game even, guys. It's instantly you're fired. Like, if you do that in my team, I am tearing your contract up in front of your face and telling you, here is your buyout. Get the fuck out of the door. You will never play for my org ever again. Well, there's my other star player. My other star player from both teams, Monty and Falcons, same complaints about the things he was doing extracurricular outside of the game. Those are my stars. Then who have I got left? I've got Chaos, who was just all right anyway on Gamer Legion, and by the way, is going to be eating steaming balls of shit every game if you look at this lineup. Like, his job, essentially, as far as I can tell, is take all the dick. That's just his job. Not even take the tip, mate. He's like that fucking guy who got killed by that horse. It's like, too much? Yeah, way too much, mate. Way too much. Then you've only got two players left. Pretty based reference, but I didn't say the name.
Yeah, that's a crazy reference.
.jpg. .jpg.
I can't even.
To be fair, it was .mpeg. Obviously, it was a video file, wasn't it? Then the last players you've got are the Guild News Eagles players, and their problem, even though by the way they're both canny players, is they obviously only ever did anything at the majors. Like, they never did anything. So it's one of those rosters that, like, on paper actually looks pretty good. Like, I actually initially thought, shit, I hope they made this, but then I realized how. Because no one wants any of these players. No one's trying to get these players. Like, in a way, this is like if someone in the fucking newspaper, Hawka, is like, fucking barely used, Ford Fiesta, only got 20,000 miles on it, willing to sell for £2,000. It's like, bro, what's wrong with this car? Before I even test drive it, come clean. Why are you selling it for that much? You know what I mean? Like, that's like, I don't know. But so sadly, I have to put it in ugly because I'm actually not saying it'll be shit, by the way. It actually looks like they have some all right players, but I think this is just like, this just has recipe for disaster written all over it from top to bottom. Some disagreement? You want to go the other way? Come on.
No, please, Into the Breach. Please make a reality show
Oh,
out of this
yes.
team. Oh my God.
Yes.
It's actually the perfect reality
Yes.
show Counter-Strike lineup, pretty much. Like, holy shit.
Yes.
This will be fiery as fuck.
Oh, mate.
And yeah,
the other thing is, normally on reality TV shows, you have to, like, spur them to do fake shit, don't you, to make it interesting. You wouldn't even need to. Like, dude, I can already imagine this show, like, Kios has just come into the diary room after Smooya has made yet another incendiary tweet after the game. Yeah, I don't know, in Game of Legion, it wasn't like this, I don't know how long I could stay. Smooya in there, like, is that Kios been in here? What was he saying about me? Like, mate, if I actually was doing Flashback, we would just make a skit that would be like this. It'd be like the fake reality series of, like, Into the Breach. Like, oh, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? It'd be amazing.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, I think you're bang on, though. I mean, obviously, Smooya, I'm always going to be in the back of my head thinking, you can go back to streaming at any point. So, like I'm not
he's
gonna lie.
fully aware of that, I'm pretty sure, at this point, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
And he was the player they announced first that they were going to build this all around. So it was like, okay, well, you're already setting yourselves up well on that one. I also want to add, by the way, I know you were talking about the Snappy Boros thing. There was an interview he did on HLTV like a few months ago, and he said a bit more about it.
Okay.
He said that basically he's publicly said Boros had already changed his mouse prior to that tournament, and it went really badly. And so they basically said to him, "We're not sure about this, but okay, we'll let you do it again." And then apparently he was also, he said publicly he was like whining mid-game about the mouse and saying, "Fuck this shit mouse," during the game, like humming during the game. So he said that, and then he's also said that's just 2% of the whole story.
There you go.
Stuff.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
like he said a little more about it, and
Okay.
he's also said, to be fair to him, he said it was fine for the public to form the narrative because they only got shown what they got shown. Like he was very
All right.
respectful. I suggest you go read the interview.
Yeah.
But he's sort of said a few breadcrumbs about that. But yeah, back to this team. Yeah, it's like firepower is like so good. Like in theory. You do have like a lot of aggressive players. Like it could be a lot of fun. You are right though. Kios is like gonna he's gonna have a tough time on this team. But outside of that, yeah, it's basically like just hilarious. Just a hilarious life. I think you know what this is. What an AI model that knew nothing about the personalities of these players. It would be
Yes,
like
true.
it's a steal. Yes, we
Yes.
get this
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
It would like you try and moneyball it and you put them all together and it just blows up.
I don't feel like this team is gonna, because even if they do what Bad News Eagle does and they try to just grind for the major, at least they have one common goal in mind that I feel like they were able to rally around, and they also seemingly, I mean, I don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes with Bad News Eagles, but it seemed like they could instill some sense of brotherhood between the lot of them, and then actually you rally around that. But I don't really see that this team would come together, because this is kind of like, you see like what FaZe does as an international roster, and it's kind of like you get everything to work, everybody's cohesive, everybody's pretty easy to work with. I'm sure there's some bickering behind the scenes, but this is like the exact opposite case. You take it's like the good and the evil. It's the mom, we have an international team at home, and it's this is just one of the worst in terms of personalities. I don't know how this could go any worse with everything that's going on about all these players. I think the one thing is that I haven't heard Kios is a problem, but that's like we're saying is also going to impede his ability to get what he wants in the server, and just he's going to sit there, and by the end of it, he's going to want to jump down a ravine in Minecraft. You know, that's it. Like I have no more words for him. And I also think that the community sentiment around him is already so negative. Like people thought that he was the worst player in Gamer Legion for such a long time, that this is not going to be some kind of career rehabilitation whatsoever for him. If anything, they're going to think, oh, yeah, of course he's bad. Like he's like, did you see what he was doing on Gamer Legion? He sucked. Like, so this is probably, for me, unless he's getting some kind of like good pay overall.
That also seems totally implausible. If I had to guess, these are low salaries, mate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, right. Exactly. I think that this is probably, I think This is probably one of the worst ideas Kia's could have probably done for his career. I think he needed to join a team that was more along the lines of like a TSM in terms of level as opposed to this. Even if you're going to make less money, obviously TSM is all Danish right now, but you know what I mean.
No,
like the last iteration of TSM would have been better if it was like him for an Inters on that roster. I would have rather him just kind of toil around there because there's at least a chance that he proves himself in role that he's still capable.
And I'll just say, I'll go ahead and predict it. Even though actually Boris's problems, as far as I know, are outside the server, it's not like he's a rage or something like that. The problem is, one, that story, the idea that he whines Hawka, like, bro, if you're actually Synopsy, good luck having smooya and fucking Boros whining in the same game. And then also, like, just start the fucking massive timer, like one of those nuclear clocks for, like, when does smooya inevitably have an argument with the two Kosovan players? Like, if you don't know, they're like... I won't say they're like other certain countries from their region, but they're pretty spicy too. They certainly don't mind fucking mixing up. So I just feel like that's going to be a steel cage deathmatch. So just to be announced, coming soon.
Yeah. Over under on how long this team
exactly.
lasts. I don't even know.
Exactly. Does this 5-man lineup even last 6 months? Exactly.
Like 2.5 months.
Surely one player immediately gets cycled in like 2 months. Exactly. Yeah. One player immediately, and then probably another one by the time the next RMR. Some shit like that. Exactly.